You've got to be kidding me, I muttered under my breath, but his response came quickly. You're the one with the problem. Why haven't you paid for the accommodation yet? I stared at him, disbelief edging my frustration. Because you're the one who left me, just bring the money here. I'm not going to, he snapped back. I'm the one who was left behind. I never even wanted to go on this trip in the first place. My marriage to my husband, Nathan, has been on a downward spiral for some time. We've been married for 6 years, and our 5-year-old daughter, Ella, is the only light in this dark tunnel. Watching her grow day by day is the only thing that still makes me smile. But as for Nathan and me, we're barely hanging on. I gave up my job when Ella was just a year old, thinking I'd focus on our home and family. Nathan said if I wasn't working, I'd need to handle everything around the house, so I took care of all the housework, all the parenting, alone. When Ella was a newborn, the sleep deprivation was overwhelming. I begged Nathan for help, but his response was cold and dismissive. I can divorce you anytime if you have a problem with it. And just to drive his point home, he pulled out the divorce papers, already signed, folded neatly, and placed them in the drawer right in front of me. Every time something went wrong, those papers came out, a constant reminder that he had no problem walking away, and neither did his mother. Speaking of her, the doorbell rang, and without waiting for an invitation, my mother-in-law barged in. She opened the fridge without asking and helped herself to Ella's yogurt, not sparing a second thought for the fact that we were out of the house at that moment. I had gotten used to her unannounced visits, but today was different. I've got good news for you, she announced, not even looking up from the yogurt. I raised an eyebrow. Good news? Yes, you should look happier that I'm telling you this. Really, you're not being very nice. My son is right about you. I forced a smile, trying not to let the irritation show. What's the news? We're going on a trip, she declared, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Where to? I asked, already sensing the catch. That's for you to decide, since you're unemployed, she replied, her tone dismissive. I blinked in confusion. What do you mean? Honestly, you're not very sharp, are you? It's such a shame. She then explained her plan. She wanted to go on a trip with Nathan, but of course, she didn't want to pay for it herself. So, her brilliant solution was to invite me and Ella, expecting me to cover the costs. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the growing anger. No matter how much I tried, it seemed like they were all working together to make my life harder. Who would want to go on a trip like that? Not me. Besides, we can't even afford it. Let's make it a grand trip, my mother-in-law suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. No, I never said I was going, I replied flatly. Let me think about it, I added quickly, ending the conversation without giving her any satisfaction. I wasn't making any promises. When Nathan came home that evening, he was in a foul mood. I could tell instantly that my mother-in-law had already filled him in on our conversation. I heard you disobeyed my mother today, he said, his voice sharp with anger. I was just being honest, I shot back. Really? Are you saying we can't take her on vacation? His tone was incredulous, as if the very idea was beyond me. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. We don't have the money for it. My mother-in-law had called it a surprise, but it was clear she had already spilled the details to Nathan. What's so surprising about this? I asked, frustration bubbling up. If we're struggling financially, it's because of how you've been handling things. Nathan glared at me, his face hardening. If we're not managing our finances properly, it's your fault. I raised an eyebrow, unable to hide my disbelief. How can I manage what we don't have? Are you saying I don't make enough money? His voice had a dangerous edge. Well, it's not much, I muttered under my breath, but he heard it. You've got to be kidding me. He slammed his fist on the table, making me flinch. Look, he snapped, his anger escalating. I'm going on this trip, no matter what. You're the one who has to plan everything. That's an order, and if you can't do it, we're getting a divorce. The words hit me harder than I expected. Divorce? Maybe that wouldn't be such a terrible option, but then I thought about Ella, our daughter, and the way she'd be affected. That was the only thing holding me back. Reluctantly, I started searching for hotels. Even though my heart wasn't in it, I still wasn't sure about going, but the pressure was mounting, and of course, once my mother-in-law heard I was looking, she became even pickier than before, making demands that seemed impossible to meet. It was clear, nothing was ever going to be enough for them. The room had an open-air bathtub, a luxurious touch that only made me feel more alienated. My mother-in-law's demands were crystal clear. She wanted the most extravagant meal the hotel could offer, and everything else to match. I couldn't help but wonder how much all this would cost, but I knew better than to question her. If I didn't meet her expectations, the storm of sarcasm and criticism would be unbearable. So, I swallowed my pride and decided to act without shame. With that, I managed to fulfill all of her requests. When she found out everything had been arranged just as she wanted, her tension was palpable. She muttered something I couldn't quite make sense of. It's because I suggested everything to her. Honestly, it was thanks to my mom that you even got this accommodation. Meanwhile, my husband had already started his usual lecture over dinner, as if it was some kind of ritual. But after enduring this for years, I had grown numb. I simply let him speak, my mind drifting elsewhere. The only silver lining was that he didn't unleash his usual sarcastic tirade in front of our daughter, Nina. He wasn't comfortable showing that side of himself to her, a small mercy in the chaos. The day of the trip, I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel. I had rented the car, and of course, I was the one driving. Nathan sat next to me, acting like a king in the passenger seat. My mother-in-law was in the back, completely ignoring Nina and muttering about souvenirs for herself. I had been driving all morning, with neither of them offering to help. The moment we reached a service area, I finally allowed myself a break, but only because Nina needed to use the restroom. I rushed her to the bathroom, hoping to get back quickly, but when I returned to the parking lot, the car was gone. Panic surged through me. I circled the lot, heart racing, but the car was nowhere in sight. Desperate, I called Nathan, but there was no answer. I tried my mother-in-law instead. "You came back too late," she said, laughing as if this were some kind of joke. "We left you." I felt my stomach drop. I was only gone for a few minutes. What's going on? Before I could say more, Nathan's voice cut through. "It's your fault this happened. You don't obey me. You shouldn't even be on this trip." "Was that your plan all along?" I asked, a bitter edge to my voice. "And if it was?" he replied coldly. I was nearly shaking. "I'm fine, but what about Nina? She's just like you, acting all high and mighty lately. She even talked back to Mom when she was complaining about you. She needs to be disciplined, too." "But she was excited for this trip," I protested, my voice breaking. Nathan's response was chilling. "I'll reconsider once you both apologize. Understand that, and you can go home now." And with that, he hung up. I stood there in disbelief, my hand still gripping the phone, as the weight of his words sank in. This trip, which was supposed to be a getaway, had turned into a nightmare. What now? The drive back from the service area felt endless. "Mom, are you okay? Did Dad and Grandma really leave us?" Nina asked, her voice laced with concern. "I guess so," I muttered, trying to hold it together. "They're so mean, aren't they?" she added, her little face scrunched in confusion. "Yeah, I think so too," I agreed, my heart sinking. "Are we going home?" she asked, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Yes, we are, but I know you were looking forward to this trip." "Only because it's with you, Mom. If you're going home, I'm going too." Her innocent smile, so full of love and trust, was the only thing keeping me grounded. I hugged her tightly, grateful for her sweetness amidst all the chaos. I called Lisa, a friend who lived nearby, and told her everything. Without hesitation, she offered to pick us up and bring us home. Back home. Lisa settled Nina into bed and made sure she was asleep before turning to me. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "I think I'm getting a divorce," I said, my voice steady but filled with finality. "That's good. You've put up with it for too long," Lisa replied, her tone firm but supportive. "Yeah, I definitely don't want a husband who treats me, and especially Nina, like this anymore." I pulled the divorce papers from a drawer, the ones Nathan had proudly shown me all those years ago, the ones that had been tucked away for far too long. I signed them without hesitation and handed them to Lisa to witness. Ironically, my mother-in-law's name was already written in the other witness box. Thanks to that, I was able to file them right away. 3 days later, after dropping Nina off at kindergarten, my phone rang, and I almost didn't want to answer, but I did. "You've got to be kidding me. You're the one with the problem." Nathan's voice was sharp, full of anger. "Why haven't you paid for the accommodation?" "Because you're the one who left me. You should have paid in advance," I replied, my tone cold. "Oh, really?" he shot back. "Then why does it cost $6,000 for the hotel?" "It's the result of fulfilling every one of your mother's demands," I said flatly. "Get over there and split it. That's $3,000 each." There was a brief pause, then I heard a woman's voice in the background. "It's time for you to pay. If you don't, I'll call the police," she said, her voice stern. "No problem. My wife will pay, she's on her way now," Nathan answered, sounding smug. "Where is your wife?" the woman asked, confusion in her voice. "At home," Nathan replied, unaware of the shift in tone. The woman paused for a moment, then she spoke again. "I checked your address, and it seems like she's a long way from here." "Excuse me?" Nathan said, his voice rising. "I've been friends with your wife since high school," the woman said. "I was the one who picked her and your daughter up from the service area." The words hung in the air between them, and for a brief moment, I could almost hear the tension on the other end of the line. Without any hesitation, I shamelessly reached out to my old friend for help with the trip. She immediately offered me the use of the hotel she owned, free of charge. Back in high school, she had struggled with her future. Her family owned a prestigious hotel, but it was never what she wanted. As the only daughter, the pressure to take over had been overwhelming, and in the end, she reluctantly stepped into the role. I was the one who had supported her through those tough times, cheering her on when she felt lost. Now, years later, she said she owed me for that support and was determined to return the favor. When I told her she didn't need to go so far, and that she could simply stay at the hotel if she wanted, she was firm. "You're not here as friends," she said, her tone professional. "You're guests, and as guests, I expect you to pay the full price." "All right," she added, turning to Nathan, "my ex-husband, why don't you pay with your credit card for now, and you can settle with your wife later?" "I don't want to do that," he muttered, his face hardening. "It's not that you don't want to," she retorted, "it's that you can't." "What do you mean?" Nathan's voice rose with confusion. "Your son's salary is $1,200 a month, and your credit card limit is $3,000 at most," Lisa replied with a pointed look. "What, you mean my wife's been lying?" Nathan's face twisted in anger. "You said you were making a good salary." He fell silent as the truth settled in. Nathan was a salesman, but his salary was barely enough to cover his bills. While he did earn incentives for successful contracts, those were inconsistent and hardly enough to meet the image he projected. "Don't tell me you're planning to pay with your savings," Lisa added sarcastically. "The savings you're using for alimony and child support, no doubt." Nathan's face turned red. "What the hell are you talking about?" he shouted. I took a breath and spoke calmly. "I filed for divorce. Didn't you always say you'd divorce me anytime? Well, I made it official. It's already submitted." "So, we're not married anymore?" he asked, his voice shaky with disbelief. "That's correct," I answered, my voice steady. "Wait a minute." "I won't wait," I replied, cutting him off. In the end, Nathan grudgingly promised Lisa that he would pay for the hotel stay in installments, but I wasn't about to let him off easy. Afterward, I hired an attorney to file for custody of Nina, along with Alan.
My husband Oliver told me, "I married you because you're the boss's daughter," with a smile. I was sick in bed, looking at the scarves and gloves I'd knitted for him tossed aside without care. His words hurt, making me realize I needed to confront him. "Oliver and I have been married for 5 years. We don't have kids, but we've been happy together. He's always busy with work, which sometimes leaves me feeling lonely, but he tries to make time for us on his days off, which helps." I met Oliver through my dad, who used to be his boss. Oliver suggested I stay home after we got married, which seemed like a good idea at the time. It gave me time to pursue my hobbies like sewing and knitting. Every winter, I made Oliver scarves and gloves. At first, they weren't very good, but I improved over time. Oliver started saying they were as good as store-bought ones, which made me happy and encouraged me to keep sewing. One day I told Oliver, "Someday, when we have a child, I want us to sew together." He smiled and replied, "Maybe I'll learn when the time comes." I always supported Oliver, took care of the house, and made sure we spent time together on his days off. With his high salary, we seemed to live a privileged life to outsiders. I was content with this life, imagining a quiet future with my kind husband and our child. About 2 years ago, our peaceful life was interrupted. I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed while waiting for Oliver to come home. He rushed me to the hospital. When I woke up in a hospital bed, I overheard Oliver talking to the doctor. My symptoms were serious and likely something I would have to deal with for life. It wasn't life-threatening immediately, but it could happen again. Given my condition, doctors advised me to stay in the hospital until I recovered somewhat. Seeing my anxiety, Oliver reassured me, "You'll be here for a while, but don't worry. I'll visit whenever I have time off from work. We'll get through this together." His words and his hand in mine eased my worries. With him by my side, I felt everything would be okay, despite not having any real guarantees. True to his promise, Oliver visited me nearly every day after that. He held my hand, checked on me, and brought my favorite sewing tools when I mentioned how boring the hospital days were. We spent time sewing together and chatting about little things that happened each day. Teaching him to sew was surprisingly enjoyable, and it helped pass the time. But after about a year, the regular visits dwindled. Instead of daily, Oliver started showing up only every few weeks. I figured he must be busy with work and continued sewing, planning to give him the finished scarf I was working on when he visited next. The doctor said I'd be discharged by the end of the year, so I also started making gloves to give him. After a long time apart, I poured my emotions into making the gloves for Oliver. But when he finally visited, he looked coldly at the gloves and said, "Are you still making these? It's annoying." He handed me back the scarf I'd made and divorce papers. The scarf, which I'd worked on tirelessly, looked brand new, untouched since I gave it to him. "You've been in the hospital for 2 years now. I heard you're getting discharged soon, but I can't keep taking care of you," he said. "Let's get a divorce." I looked at the divorce papers. Oliver had already signed them. I thought, so this is how it ends. Truthfully, I'd thought about this possibility ever since he stopped visiting regularly. I tried to convince myself he was just busy with work, but I knew the real Oliver wouldn't neglect me like this. If work had gotten in the way, he would have told me. When he stopped coming without explanation, I knew this was coming. That's why I managed to ask calmly why he wanted a divorce. I wasn't trying to hold on to Oliver. In fact, I knew I had probably become a burden to him. If the kind Oliver I knew wanted a divorce, then I guessed I had no choice. But since Oliver had promised we face things together, I was curious why he had changed his mind. When I asked him, still dazed, Oliver replied harshly, "Isn't it obvious? Since I married you, it's been nothing but trouble. I'm tired of those scarves and gloves you give me every year. I only married you because your father's the boss. How am I supposed to handle you getting sick on top of everything?" He laughed at me mockingly, saying he was fed up with dealing with me. It seemed he resented my innocent enjoyment of our life together. Whenever I talked about happiness, love, or loneliness, he seemed to think I was foolish. Who even wears handmade scarves anymore without feeling embarrassed? Getting those things from you is annoying and a hassle. As Oliver spoke, I noticed he was wearing a luxurious scarf that I hadn't given him. It was clearly better quality than the ones I had made. I wondered if he had never used any of my gifts before. Perhaps they had always annoyed him, and I hadn't realized. After I got sick and my father retired, Oliver no longer had to pretend to care about me at work. Having a sick wife became a convenient excuse for him. In the first year, he made a show of visiting me between his work duties. I could imagine my father, before retiring, praising Oliver at work for being a good husband who worked hard while looking after his sick wife. Oliver had crafted this image for himself and was well liked by his colleagues. That's what he wanted, and it seems my value to him was only realized when I fell ill. When I confronted him with these thoughts, Oliver looked surprised and admitted, "Well, it did make things easier at work. Whenever I mentioned you, people were sympathetic and treated me well. If I worked late, I was praised for being dedicated. If I needed a break, I just had to say my wife is, and that was enough." He said this without a hint of regret. He had cleverly used my illness to his advantage in ways I hadn't known. "And as for my upcoming promotion, well, they may be idiots, but I owe it to your illness," he added. As I listened with my head bowed, I looked up when he finished speaking. Instead of the man I loved, I saw a cruel grin on his face. I realized this was his true self. Well, if I could be of some use, then that's good. "We probably won't see each other again, so take care," I calmly said, returning the divorce papers to him. He took them without a second glance and swiftly left. That marked the end of our marriage, and I silently cried. After some time, I left the hospital and moved back in with my parents. When my father heard what had happened, he was outraged. "I never expected him to be like that," he said. But I had already made my peace. I reassured my father and told him I wanted to stay with them. After tidying up the house, my parents understood and encouraged me to do what made me happy. For now, that meant living with them. Before moving back with my parents, I decided to visit our old house. But when we arrived, the front door lock was broken. Perplexed, we rang the doorbell and were met by a stranger. I asked him about it, and he told us he had bought the house a few months ago and was now living there happily with his family. My parents were furious, but I chose not to disturb the new residents and quietly left. Unable to leave it be, I called my husband right away. He casually replied, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. Keeping the money is my compensation. It was my house originally, so you can't complain, right?" His nonchalant words made me sigh. I wish he had told me sooner, I thought. From what I learned, the house had been sold about a year ago, around the time he started showing less concern for me. Even if he had planned to divorce me, selling our home without discussing it was shocking. Although we had finalized our divorce by signing the papers, we still needed to discuss dividing our assets after my discharge. We had scheduled a meeting for the following week, but my husband had acted on his own, which was beyond belief. When I calmly confronted my husband over the phone, telling him he didn't understand anything, he seemed puzzled. "What do you mean?" he asked. I replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up. I smiled at my concerned parents and asked my father for a favor. I shared my plans with him and asked him to get everything ready. "I've already prepared all the necessary documents. There's not much time before our meeting next week, but we'll manage," my father said, with a slightly worried smile. As my father, he probably felt guilty for introducing me to my husband. His anger toward my husband spurred him to do everything possible to help me. I thanked him and looked forward to our meeting day. Just imagining my husband's face made me smile for the first time in a while. With my father's support, I got ready for the meeting. We decided to meet at my parents' house. We sat in a row, my parents and I on one side, and my husband on the other. He must have known my parents were hurt by the divorce, but he seemed indifferent now. He probably felt there was no need to respect my parents anymore. He remained composed, even showing a hint of a smirk. His attitude was disrespectful and arrogant. "I'm the one who's been wronged here, but I don't plan to ask for too much," I said calmly. "The money from selling the house will be enough," my husband replied, trying to appear generous. My father's face turned red with anger, but I gently placed my hand on his to calm him. We knew that in this discussion my husband was the one at a disadvantage, so there was no need for us to get overly upset. "Before we proceed, there's something important to discuss," I continued, and my father handed over a document. It proved that the land under the house my husband sold belonged to my father. "Yes, the house was in your name, that's clear. But the land belongs to my father, and he holds the title," I explained, showing him the document. My husband frowned slightly. "So what? The house was still mine. No one can complain. Do you think this gives you a way to get back at me?" He chuckled as if he found the whole situation absurd. "It's true that legally, selling the house under my husband's name posed no issues, even though the land belongs to my father," I explained further. "However, this creates a significant problem for the family who bought the house. You sold the house, right? But since my father owns the land, he could demand rent from the family living there. Wouldn't that cause trouble?" I questioned. "We're not planning to take that step, but we won't give up our land rights for nothing. In this situation, our plan is to offer the family the opportunity to purchase the land. We won't ask them to leave or charge rent monthly, but it would be problematic if they refuse to buy the land. Originally, my father intended the land as a gift for us to live on, not to be given away freely to strangers. If they refuse, the family who bought the house might even sue you because the deal wasn't as they were led to believe. Imagine their frustration buying their dream home only to find out they have additional expenses." After we confirmed my father's ownership of the land, we went straight to the family who bought the house. When we explained the situation, they were understanding. They agreed that if there were any legal issues, it would be the seller's responsibility, meaning my husband. They mentioned they might sue him if negotiations failed. Seeing my husband's face go pale, I knew he realized the seriousness of the situation. He understood he could face significant financial consequences. In a shaky voice, he asked, "What should I do?" I smiled and replied, "The family could buy the land from us to settle everything smoothly. You'll have to cover that cost. Once they own both the house and land, all current issues will be resolved. Since they weren't informed of the land's value when buying the house, they might demand compensation from you. But that's their decision. The problem is, due to its prime location, the land could be worth more than the house. Even if my husband sells all his assets, it might not be enough. In the end, he could be left with nothing. Alternatively, you could buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee to the family. This would return both the house and land to your possession. You could then sell them again, possibly making some money. However, after paying the relocation fee, it's unlikely you'd end up with much," I explained. "Either way, you're facing losses," I continued. "And regarding alimony, your actions have caused me significant mental distress. I intend to seek compensation for that, so keep that in mind. I've come to realize you used me as a pawn for your career ambitions. Now that I know this, I'm repulsed by everything you've done, and I plan to pursue damages for the emotional distress it's caused me. While evidence may be limited and winning uncertain, discussing this matter is crucial given your current situation." Cornered, Oliver may soon face these harsh realities, my father added. "Despite being retired, I still have many connections from my career. I've been in touch with former colleagues who have shared your opinions and actions regarding my daughter. You're being looked down upon by everyone, Oliver." With a cheerful smile, my father shared the news, and finally, Oliver understood the gravity of his situation. The status he had built at work, using me and the money from selling the house without my consent, was slipping away. "Now let's discuss what happens next," I said, clasping my hands together and smiling. It was a different smile from any Oliver had seen before, brighter since our separation. You must understand that the fate of your assets will be decided today, I continued. Drawn in by my words, Oliver could only manage a forced laugh, tears in his eyes. The negotiations favored me, and Oliver agreed to pay alimony. We also settled that Oliver would compensate for the land where the house stood, which we then explained to the family who bought our house. In the end, everyone benefited except Oliver, who lost everything. The rumors my father started spread through the company, causing Oliver to lose his status and halt his chances for promotion. As the rumors continued, Oliver found himself isolated, and eventually my father informed me that Oliver had resigned. It's tempting to see it all as karma, as gains made through exploitation are fragile. What Oliver thought he had achieved turned out to be fleeting. As for me, I'm living in my parents' home now and teaching sewing classes. My classes aren't packed, but I earn a decent income thanks to local participants like neighborhood women and children. Although I couldn't have children of my own, as I once mentioned to Oliver, I've discovered that sharing my passion brings me genuine happiness.
I'm all set for life, marrying into wealth. While you continue to struggle in your modest existence, Bob jeered with a smirk, throwing condescending words my way. His shrill voice pierced the air, disrupting my relaxing break in the hotel lobby. I wondered where he had met his new wife, a president's daughter, no less. Julie, the daughter of Johnson Enterprises. Bob, with his middle-aged man's laugh, seemed oddly proud. But the mention of Johnson Enterprises caught my attention. It sounded familiar. But which company was it? Ah, yes. I recalled the details about Johnson Enterprises, and a proud smile spread across Bob's face. Meanwhile, I struggled to suppress a laugh bubbling up inside me. My name is Amy. I'm 35 and living with my husband, Bob. I work in my family's real estate business, handling mostly administrative tasks. My father, the president, manages the key business strategies. Being an only child, I'm expected to eventually take over the company. With older executives at the helm, I feel the pressure of one day becoming the president. However, I've been careful not to discuss much about our family business with Bob, who only finished high school and works in a moving company. I don't want to bring work matters home, and Bob, feeling somewhat inferior, avoids the topic. Of course, moving is a tough job requiring physical strength and skill, a job for professionals. I don't mind that he only has a high school diploma, but I understand his feelings, so I avoid mentioning my prestigious university degree or my future role as president in our daily conversations. Bob and I met through a friend's introduction in college. My friend had hired Bob's moving company, and he was in charge of her move. Initially interested in my friend, Bob was turned down, but they got along, so she introduced him to me. Our unusual meeting turned out well, as Bob's carefree nature was a good match for my meticulous personality. After several dates, we became a couple in my late 20s, and at the right age for marriage, our relationship quickly led to marriage within a year. Thus began my life as Bob's wife. Our married life started without any issues. Bob's parents were incredibly kind, always welcoming me with smiles during our visits. Considering the common mother-in-law issues among my friends, I felt lucky to have such a harmonious relationship with my in-laws. However, Bob's demanding job often kept him out until late, physically taxing and leaving him exhausted. Despite his fatigue, he never neglected our marital life. While appreciative, I often thought he didn't need to try so hard. Thanks for always waiting up for me. Bob would thank me for simply preparing dinner after his long workdays. I felt blessed to have such a wonderful husband, but our peaceful days began to waver a year into our marriage. Hey, why can't we have kids? One night as we got into bed, Bob casually brought up the subject, his tone slightly irritated. It took me by surprise. I had thought about having children too, and although we weren't actively trying, given our regular marital life, I believed it would happen in time. It's just bad timing. We've only been married a year, so it's not something to worry about yet. I reassured him. I definitely wanted children but knew that rushing wouldn't help. To reassure Bob, I deliberately adopted a relaxed tone and said, "It's still okay, huh? Don't you know for couples not using contraception, there's about an 80% chance of conceiving within a year?" Bob, more forceful than usual, even quoted percentages. 80% within a year. Not well versed in pregnancy statistics, that number seemed incredibly high to me. Really? If you're that eager for kids, should we get tested together? I thought it best to identify and address any clear issues. I proposed that both of us undergo fertility tests, but Bob's response caught me off guard. "What are you talking about? Are you implying it's my fault?" Infertility issues are usually the woman's fault. There's no point in me getting tested. Bob's contemptuous tone, a first for him, stunned me. I hadn't accused him of being the cause. I simply suggested testing since we didn't know where the issue lay yet. However, Bob jumped to the conclusion that I was blaming him and added, "It's definitely the woman's fault," as if to say I was the problem. I wanted to say more, but I was shaking, barely able to reply. Of course, I managed to say, "So just you get tested. I'm too busy with work. I have a job too. You're just a placeholder office lady, right? Just coasting along in a company thanks to your dad's connections." I never just coast at my company. Sure, I do a lot of administrative work now, but I'm also learning management skills from my father for when I take over the company. I'm constantly trying to prove myself, and it's tough dealing with the higher-ups. Bob just doesn't understand my struggles. That night, it seemed pointless to argue with him. Any word I said was met with sharp retorts, and we went to sleep back to back in a heavy atmosphere. From that day on, Bob's attitude towards me changed completely. "I'm home." "What? Dinner's not ready yet? What time do you think it is? Can't have kids. Can't do housework. What a useless wife." One evening, after a late talk with my father about the future, I came home to find Bob berating me for not having dinner ready. "I'm sorry, I just got home 10 minutes ago. I'll start cooking now." "Just wait a little, please," I hurriedly explained. Bob muttered. That's typical of a small company's boss's daughter. He didn't know, but my father's real estate company was not small at all, with hundreds of employees. But I knew arguing this point was meaningless. "I'll cook right away, have a drink, and wait." Bob loved his alcohol. It seemed to calm him down. Relying on alcohol to maintain our relationship felt sad. I hated being berated by him, but if alcohol could soothe him even a bit, then it was worth it. The next morning, Bob's mood hadn't improved. "Make sure dinner's ready when I get home," he spat as he left. I sighed, thinking about my plans for the day. I had taken the day off to visit the gynecologist for fertility testing, as previously mentioned by Bob. Although I was the one who initially suggested the testing, the fact that only I was undergoing it while Bob refused was something I found hard to accept. But complaining wouldn't change anything. If the issue was with me, I needed to start infertility treatment promptly. Bob had been wanting kids, and I too hoped for a child soon. I knew fertility rates differ between the 20s and 30s, so sooner was better for treatment. The clinic was busier than expected, and I was called in for examination an hour after registration. After undergoing a physical examination and blood tests, I was told that the results would be available during my next visit. It would be a shock if the issue was with me, but I was prepared for any necessary steps, no matter the outcome. I resolved not to lose heart. "Bob, I went for the fertility test today." When Bob came home from work, I informed him about the test. "Huh, figures. If the problem's with you, testing's the right thing to do. Let me know the results as soon as you get them," he said. Bob's belief that I was the cause of our infertility frustrated me. The fertility testing required much time and effort, and a bit of understanding from him would have been welcome. 5 years passed, and I turned 35. Though we continued our efforts to conceive, we remained childless, and Bob seemed to have given up on having a child with me. His late nights increased, and sometimes he didn't come home at all. When asked, he said he was out drinking with colleagues, then singing karaoke till morning. His behavior was more akin to a college student, and deeply exasperated me. My work had become busier, and the thought of starting a family was pushed aside. But Bob's recent actions were too much. His lack of concern for our home life was clear. One day, after Bob went out on his day off, I observed that he had left his smartphone in the living room, forgetting to take it with him. With that realization, I picked up Bob's phone, intending to take it to his room. It was at that moment that his phone rang, an incoming call from a certain Julie, as indicated by the caller ID. Assuming it was a work contact, I answered to inform them that Bob had forgotten his phone at home. "Hey, Bob, you're late. I've been waiting for 30 minutes. Where are you? If you don't hurry, we'll miss the park opening." The flirty voice on the phone made me catch my breath. "Can you hear me? Hurry up, okay? We haven't had a date in so long." The mention of a date shook me, and I quickly ended the call. My heart wouldn't stop racing. Who was this woman? She mentioned a date, so she likely wasn't a colleague. He's cheating on me. Holding undeniable proof of Bob's infidelity, I clenched his phone tightly. Julie had said it was a long-awaited date, indicating a long-term affair. I trembled with indescribable anger. While I was struggling with infertility, Bob was carelessly cheating on me. His recent distance now made sense. He no longer needed me. Unforgivable. Determined to make Bob pay, I started collecting evidence of his infidelity. It wasn't hard to gather proof. First, I easily unlocked his smartphone using his birth date. The call history was filled with Julie's name. When I opened the messaging app, I found numerous messages between Bob and Julie, filled with embarrassingly affectionate words that made me feel nauseated. I took photos of these pieces of evidence with my phone. After placing Bob's phone back in his room, I spent the day as if nothing had happened. After a month of a strange marriage, my father, the company president, summoned me to his office. "I have something important to discuss with you," he said gravely. Shocked by his words, I couldn't believe what I heard. "Is that true?" I asked. "Yes, so I'm counting on you." Disturbed, I returned to my office, barely concentrating on work. That evening, Bob suggested we separate. Having found evidence of his affair, I had been contemplating when to bring up divorce, but him initiating it saved me the hassle. "Yes, let's divorce." "Really?" Because I had readily accepted the divorce, Bob seemed surprised. Perhaps he was happy about being able to be with his mistress, a woman named Julie. His face was filled with an unmistakable joy that I found irritating. Despite my irritation with Bob's expression, I signed the divorce papers he offered. "I can file these tomorrow. I'll be leaving this house." "Okay. Are you sure about the mortgage?" I anticipated he would want me to leave, so I casually asked. "Oh yes, I'm fine." Bob's job was demanding but not high-paying. I doubted he could handle the mortgage alone. But since he initiated the divorce and was the one cheating, I felt no obligation to help. I packed and left the house 3 days later, moving back to my parents' house nearby. My parents initially seemed concerned when I told them about my divorce. But when I explained that Bob had cheated on me, they became furious. They repeatedly reassured me that it was the right decision to part ways with such a man. I threw myself into work, trying to forget about Bob. Before I realized it, a year had flown by. I was so engrossed in my work that I lost sight of everything else. It was astonishing. One day, while relaxing in the living room, my dad approached me. "Why don't you take a break and go on a trip? It's going to get busy starting next month." Guess he thought I'd been working too hard and needed a distraction. Indeed, I had been overwhelmed with various things lately and felt mentally exhausted. Thinking a little trip wouldn't hurt, I took up Dad's suggestion and decided to travel to the Northeast. It was my first solo trip, and I was both nervous and excited. The air in the Northeast was crisp and seemed to cleanse my weary soul. Interacting with the locals who helped me navigate and chatting with the owner of a bar, I found everyone to be incredibly kind, which gradually healed my spirit. I had booked a hotel in Seattle, the most famous and largest around here, thinking, why not enjoy the trip to the fullest? After checking in, I relaxed in the lobby with a welcome drink. The fatigue from the journey seemed to melt away, feeling utterly comfortable. jokingly considering moving to Seattle, a familiar voice called out. "Ha! Hey, what are you doing here?" I spun around, startled by the unmistakable voice of my ex-husband, Bob, entering the lobby with 2 large suitcases and a young woman in her early 20s. She had flawless skin, bold makeup, and striking red nails, despite the chilly northeast weather. Wearing a short skirt with bare legs, I stared at Bob and the woman in disbelief, unable to contain my curiosity. "Why are you here, and who is she?" I blurted out, even though I wasn't sure if I wanted to know. "Oh, let me introduce you. This is Julie, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. Guess what?" "She's a wealthy businessman's daughter," Bob exclaimed, appearing genuinely happy and volunteering information I hadn't asked for. However, the name Julie struck a chord, the same name as the person on the phone. Disgusted that he was with such a young girl, I felt a surge of discomfort. "You're on a solo trip here. That's pathetic," Bob sneered, despite being the one who cheated and initiated our divorce. Julie, too, was looking at me with narrowed eyes, her tone carrying amusement. "Hey, Bob, is this your ex-wife? She looks old. Hurry up with the check-in." Irritated by her catty tone, I glared at Julie. Bob nonchalantly wrapped an arm around her waist, responding, "Yeah, I'm set for life marrying into money. You can keep struggling in your poor life." Bob's high-pitched voice echoed through the hotel lobby, disrupting the elegant atmosphere I was enjoying and leaving me feeling upset. His mention of marrying a businessman's daughter made me wonder where he had met someone like that. "Yeah, Julie is the daughter of Johnson Enterprises," Bob proudly stated, his middle-aged laugh seeming childishly proud to me. I pondered, feeling that Johnson Enterprises sounded familiar. After a moment, I recalled it. "Oh right, that company." Bob's face lit up with pride. "Impressive, huh?" he exclaimed. However, I was secretly holding back laughter inside. "Come on, you know this company. Her family's loaded, and they even paid off the mortgage on that house quickly. Thanks for divorcing me so easily, Amy." His tone was dripping with sarcasm, but it didn't bother me at all. "Yeah, I know them. They're in the biggest building downtown, right? I've seen it and even been there," I replied calmly. "Oh, you've been there?" Bob seemed surprised. "It's quick then. Her family owns a huge company, so they're loaded. Breaking up with you was the right choice." Bob smirked nastily, but I simply nodded, still calm. "That building, it's part of our real estate holdings," I mentioned casually, as if I just remembered. Bob and Julie both asked in unison, "What do you mean by our real estate?" "That building is rented by my father for his most prestigious office. I don't know if your company is involved in real estate, but it's not a shabby building," I explained calmly. Both seemed skeptical of my words. I hesitated for a moment, but there was no turning back now. Telling Bob about my company wasn't my concern anymore. "Yes, I know how grand it is. I was there when my father bought that building. It was about $200 million, I think. But recently, Dad was complaining about a tenant not paying their rent. Turns out it was your company. In fact, my father is a real estate magnate with assets worth $3.2 billion. The building Johnson Enterprises is in is one of them. The tenants of the building change regularly, but currently it's Johnson Enterprises. For the past few months, they hadn't paid their rent, and that's what was troubling my father. Rent not paid." Julie looked shocked, but then she burst out laughing. "That can't be true. Our company's doing great. We can surely pay the rent." I'm not falling for such a lame lie to drive a wedge between Bob and me. Her shrill voice echoed in my ears. I let out a deep sigh. It seemed like a reasonable conversation with this woman was impossible. Pulling out my smartphone right there, I decided to call my dad. "Dad, I'm here with the daughter of Johnson Enterprises. Can you send me a photo of the reminder notice for the rent?" I quickly relayed my request, and Dad sent a photo of the rent reminder notice for Johnson Enterprises. Showing it to Bob and Julie, I doubted they could suspect it was fake, given the speed. "See, you can tell, right? 3 months of unpaid rent. If you don't pay soon, we might have to sue." "What are you going to do?" At the mention of a lawsuit, Bob and Julie's faces turned pale. Come to think of it, Dad has been really on edge lately, yelling about sales and firing a lot of employees, Julie mumbled, sounding unsure. Seeing her, Bob shouted in despair, "Lies. You're just trying to trick us and tear Julie and me apart, aren't you? You're still that kind of person, trying to get back at me for remarrying. Your tactics are dirty." Startled by Bob's loud voice, I took a step back, hearing Bob's accusations of dirty tactics. Memories of all the heartless words he had hurled at me during our marriage flooded back. Determined to confront Bob, who was now gloating about marrying Julie, a wealthy businessman's daughter, I prepared myself to tell him the truth. "What are you even saying? Do you really think I still have feelings for you? How foolish. I've long been fed up with a man like you. In fact, I've been feeling sorry for Julie, who got caught up with you. Did you marry her just for her money? You married me for shallow reasons too, like wanting to get married quickly or wanting kids. And who was it that left me when he found out we couldn't have kids? Who insulted me, calling me useless for being infertile? You're to blame for all of it, yet you think I still like you. You must be out of your mind." I unleashed my pent-up frustrations on Bob, feeling a wave of relief. Bob, on the other hand, seemed infuriated, trembling with anger. "You're just an arrogant old hag. You probably can't even get married or have kids anymore. Julie and I were planning to have fun making a baby after this trip, and now you're accusing Johnson Enterprises of not paying rent." Panicked upon realizing the poor performance of Johnson Enterprises, Bob was desperate to blame all his misfortunes on me, deciding to deliver the final blow. I calmly said, "Oh, I didn't mention it, but I'm 4 months pregnant. I'm in the stable phase of my pregnancy, so Dad suggested I take this trip to relax. Of course, I have my doctor's permission." That's right. After divorcing Bob, I had found a new love, my boss at work and a subordinate of my father. He supported me mentally when I was struggling, encouraged me at work, and fully supported me. I found out I was pregnant with his child just 3 months ago. Knowing about the baby, I immediately married him. It was a quick marriage, but the company celebrated it grandly. My pregnancy was going smoothly, and encouraged by my father and husband, I embarked on this trip. And just before breaking up with Bob, my father had told me he was retiring as CEO next month. He decided to retire after being diagnosed with diabetes and thinking it was time to step down. Therefore, I would inherit my father's assets. This made it easier for me to accept the divorce from Bob. Even without Bob, I knew I could live a full life. The word pregnant slipped effortlessly from my lips, leaving Bob shouting, "What? You're pregnant? So, were you using birth control when we were married? What's going on?" Bob stomped his feet in complete confusion. "Birth control? I never did that. Remember, I told you I had infertility tests at the clinic, and they found no issues. So the problem was with you. Too bad." As I bluntly told this to Bob, his face twisted visibly. The problem was with me? Does that mean Julie and I can't have kids? Why did I divorce you and marry Julie? Bob muttered to himself, shoulders slumped in defeat. "What do you mean? Why?" I felt betrayed, knowing he was infertile. Julie snapped, angry at Bob's selfish reasoning. Realizing I couldn't bother with them anymore, I said my final words. "That's why from now on, please don't involve yourself with me and Julie. Regarding the rent for Johnson Enterprises, I won't back down until it's fully paid. If you plan to continue renting that building, please pay the overdue rent soon. Otherwise, we'll have to take legal action. I have nothing more to save you two, so goodbye." I left Bob and Julie arguing and confidently walked back to my hotel room. After returning from my trip, my husband greeted me with a smile, saying, "Welcome back. Sorry I couldn't help around the house. Was everything okay?" "Of course, it was fine. I'm glad you got to relax, Amy." "Thank you." My husband smiled warmly at me, and I felt a great sense of relief. Since marrying my current husband, I've been reassured every day, completely forgetting about Bob. Since that trip, I haven't met Bob. The following is what I heard through my father's contacts. After that incident, Bob and Julie's fights became incessant. Despite thinking he was marrying into wealth, Bob discovered Johnson Enterprises was in deep debt. Coincidentally, news was all over TV about a Johnson Enterprises employee embezzling millions of dollars from clients. Julie's father knew about the fraud, but tried to cover it up for the company's reputation. However, once the scandal became public, Johnson Enterprises' stock plummeted, having lost its credibility. The company saw a mass exodus of employees. In such a state, they couldn't possibly pay the rent. So my father was taking legal action against Johnson Enterprises. The future of the company looked bleak, entirely Johnson Enterprises' fault. Bob, having lost a fortune he thought was within his grasp, was furiously blaming everyone but himself. Thinking he could ride on the coattails of wealth was overly optimistic of Bob. Julie, realizing Bob was infertile, accused him of marriage fraud. Furthermore, after our hotel encounter, I had a lawyer demand compensation from Bob for his infidelity, leaving both him and Julie in debt. I heard that Bob and Julie ended up arguing every time they saw each other, and they finally got divorced recently. Then, unbelievably, Bob called me after divorcing Julie. "Amy, please marry me again. I have debts." Other than the alimony, Julie made me buy everything she wanted and then left without paying a dime. "You're the only one I can rely on. I'll do anything for you. Please forgive me." Bob's pleas, sounding like a beggar, were so pitiful that they almost made me sick. His unchanged attitude of marrying for money was just appalling. "No, I have no desire to be involved with you ever again. I'm going to be happy with my husband and our child, so please don't contact me again. Goodbye," I said calmly, and then immediately set his phone number to be blocked. That should stop any more absurd calls from Bob. Having lost his wife and money, Bob will likely live a lonely life now. Given his infertility, remarriage might be difficult for him. Moreover, it's hard to imagine someone falling for a person like Bob who mocks others so readily. All I could think was that he should at least try to repay his debts. I thought about it as if it were someone else's problem. As for me, I'm looking forward to my life with my husband and our soon-to-arrive baby. Both my work and personal life are more fulfilling than ever, and I'm savoring this unparalleled happiness. My father has been expanding and generating profits within the company founded by my grandfather. Recently, he promised to transfer a luxurious villa, a mansion, to me. However, I've come to the realization that what's rightfully yours should also be mine as your husband. This mansion is now mine, and I plan to hire you as a housemaid. If you're not on board with that, well, you can always consider divorce. As it turns out, despite the mansion supposedly being in my name, my husband had clandestinely inscribed his own name on the legal papers. Does he genuinely believe that's acceptable? Does he comprehend the potential consequences of such actions? My name is Aaron, and while I don't intend to boast, I was born into a wealthy family. My father, the CEO of several companies, inherited the business from my grandfather, who initially started a small shop repairing and selling TVs and music systems. Over time, the company flourished, expanding into various branches and diversifying into the IT sector. My father's foresight, selling computers and accessories before they gained widespread popularity, proved to be a lucrative move. Besides IT, he ventured into real estate, collaborating with local businesses and actively contributing to community development. My mother served as the vice president of the company, and after studying it in college, I joined the family business. Despite the outward appearance of affluence, we didn't live as extravagantly as portrayed in TV dramas. My father believed in instilling good values, rejecting the notion that spoiling a child aids in their responsible growth. Our family home was spacious, and we had a maid, but as a child, I actively participated in household chores. Dining at fancy restaurants occurred infrequently, and our international travels were limited to once a year, with the majority being local trips. My school life seemed quite ordinary, and it would have been challenging for anyone to guess that my family was affluent. Due to my unassuming demeanor, I dated guys within my age group, just like any other girl. Among them, Michael, who later became my husband, was one of my colleagues at the same workplace. During those times, I worked as a sales representative and office manager at an aid-related shop, and Michael was also a sales rep there. I chose not to disclose that my father was the CEO to my coworkers, making it easier for Michael to approach me. I noticed that he was straightforward and had no reservations. Although I didn't seek extravagance, I'd always suggested places within Michael's budget. During our dates at restaurants, he would order generously, explaining that if there's extra, he'd eat it, opting for a cost-effective approach to enjoy a hearty meal. Some might have considered him a bit frugal, but I found it endearing. Unbeknownst to him, I earned several times more than he did, content with my fair compensation for the responsibilities I held. I unconsciously became accommodating. Michael, always keen on budget-friendly ways to satisfy his appetite, received my gestures with gratitude. During our dates, I'd often bought extra food or thoughtful gifts, knowing he would appreciate them. When shopping for clothes, I would add extra socks for him, and on occasions when I got a new bedspread, I'd include pajamas and a pillow for him. I genuinely enjoyed making him happy. Even when visiting his home, I willingly cooked for him and took care of the cleanup. Out of the blue, Michael proposed to me one day, expressing that there was no one better than me. At that moment, I hesitated, harboring reservations. After all, my father was the CEO of a major company, and he held a prominent position at my current workplace. I feared that if Michael were to discover this, he might reconsider our relationship. Deciding to take Michael to my parents' home for the first time, I aimed to introduce him to my family and disclose everything about our background. If he accepted it all, I would be more than willing to marry him. As Michael's inaugural visit to my family home approached, he appeared visibly nervous. However, my dad, though strict on occasion, generally exuded a calm demeanor. When I presented Michael as the man I was contemplating marrying, my father welcomed him with a warm smile, alleviating some of Michael's tension. Although surprised to learn about my father's CEO status, Michael managed to navigate the visit smoothly with my father's supportive demeanor. Upon leaving the house, Michael exclaimed about the enormity and magnificence of the residence, expressing gratitude for my father's kindness. He even suggested that we could get along well. When I casually mentioned my dad's ownership of additional buildings and a vacation home, Michael appeared more astonished. Despite the revelation, he resolved to marry me, the daughter of such a prominent man, and I agreed wholeheartedly. Eventually, we became a married couple. However, something bothered me. At the moment of accepting his proposal, I noticed a slightly mischievous grin on Michael's face for a split second. Dismissing it as his quirky way of smiling, I didn't dwell on it, but perhaps had I paid more attention, I could have averted the impending tragedy. As Michael and I moved into a typical, not overly luxurious apartment, he seemed to grasp the significance of my father's status. Yet I never explicitly disclosed my income, maintaining a modest lifestyle. Gradually, Michael's demeanor changed after settling in. While I balanced work and household responsibilities, he started demanding more. One evening, as I prepared dinner, he asked, "What's for dinner tonight?" In response, I informed him that I had prepared his favorite curry rice. However, to my surprise, he appeared dissatisfied as he sat on the sofa. Letting out a sigh, he expressed his desire for something like a prime beef steak once in a while. This caught me off guard, as he had never complained about my cooking before. I pointed out that prime beef was quite expensive, but he clicked his tongue in annoyance, insisting that, considering my father's earnings, indulging in prime beef occasionally should not be a big deal. Reluctantly, I agreed to get prime beef for the next day. Michael smirked, stating that we should be able to enjoy such things normally from now on. While my salary could afford such luxuries, My previous lifestyle had instilled a reluctance to spend so extravagantly. However, to avoid issues early in our marriage, I resigned myself to the decision to actually cook prime beef steak. Unfortunately, Michael's lavish tendencies did not stop there. He frequently requested expensive ingredients for meals and specified upscale restaurants when we went out. His cravings extended beyond food, manifesting in desires for a TV larger than 60 inches and even suggesting we should purchase a massage chair for the sake of relaxation after work. These remarks became more frequent, and I began to feel that it was getting out of hand. I questioned the need for such extravagant items, expressing my concern about the expenses involved. Frustrated, I finally retorted, asking him if he thought we were made of money. I challenged his extravagant lifestyle, stating that living so lavishly was unnecessary. In response, Michael made a displeased face and clicked his tongue again, expressing his discontent. He argued that, as the husband, he contributed to the household expenses and insisted that I should listen to him. However, his statements puzzled me, as his contributions, while appreciated, did not amount to a lavish sum. In fact, I contributed more, a fact I never disclosed to him. Despite my substantial financial input, he made these assertions without hesitation. This change in Michael's behavior left me questioning his mindset. He was not like this before, and I couldn't comprehend why he had changed at that moment. I found myself in a state of confusion, unable to comprehend Michael's recent behavior. In response to his audacious requests, I decided to temporarily appease the situation by telling him, "All right, I'll think about it." Little did I know that the explanation for his bold behavior would become apparent just a few days later. On that particular day, my father summoned me to the office of our shop where I worked, claiming that he had something important to discuss. While Michael was engrossed in his work, my father entered the office and initiated a serious conversation. He expressed uncertainty about how much longer he could continue as the CEO and hinted at the possibility of me taking over in the future. Furthermore, he mentioned transferring the vacation home to me. This vacation home, briefly mentioned to Michael earlier, resembled a large lodge located about a 30-minute drive away. It was a place where my father used to host gatherings with town shop owners, under the guise of meetings. Although such meetings were no longer held, the house was consistently ready to be lived in, maintained by a housekeeper. My father offered me the freedom to use the vacation home however I wanted. This proposition left me torn, as I had no concrete idea of how to utilize such a property. The vacation home boasted over 6,000 square feet, with a lavish garden surrounded by nature, akin to a mansion. Lacking the social connections to host significant parties, I contemplated keeping it as an asset. I conveyed to my father that I would positively consider his proposal but needed more time to make a decision. He assured me there was no rush and left a contract on the desk before departing the shop. Returning home after work, I leaned towards accepting the mansion, intending to give it further thought the next day. However, the following day brought an unexpected turn of events. Upon arriving at work, I discovered that Michael, who typically arrived before me, was absent from the shop. Intrigued, I entered the office only to find him there. Instinctively, I asked, "What are you doing here?" To my surprise, he flashed a document in my face, stating, "I overheard the conversation about the mansion yesterday. Sounds like an amazing deal, right?" Dumbfounded by Michael's audacious move, I reluctantly signed the document he flaunted, a contract my father had handed me just the day before. Shockingly, Michael had inscribed his own name on it. I was utterly taken aback and couldn't help but express my disbelief. "What on earth are you doing?" I questioned him, but Michael, without a hint of remorse, casually responded, "Why not? Your dad said he's giving away an amazing mansion, right? If you won't decide, I figured I'd take it." He said this with a smirk, but there was no way I could accept it. Persistently, I pleaded with him, emphasizing the house's worth of $4 million and my father's intention to give it to me. However, Michael dismissed my concerns with a nonchalant laugh. $4 million bucks? Dan, that's impressive. Think about it. I have the right to this mansion because you're my wife, and I'm your husband, so I have a right to what's yours. Moreover, your dad really likes me. He probably won't have any complaints. So from today, this villa is my house. If you live in a wealthy house, you've got to make use of it. How about I hire you as a maid in this mansion? If you have any complaints, I'll divorce you anytime, he confidently declared. It was at that moment when I recalled Michael's past actions and words, and everything finally clicked. He seemingly had no qualms about taking from others, even if it meant practically stealing without feeling guilty. During our dating days, I'd always showered him with gifts, but he never reciprocated. My giving nature might have corrupted him, leading him to believe that what was mine was automatically his. My dad's kindness to Michael likely made him feel my father was easy to manipulate, and perhaps he perceived me as even more gullible. With a plan forming in my mind, I decided to confront him. I declared, "Fine then. This mansion is yours, but I'm not going to be your maid. Let's get a divorce. Take care." After that, I returned to my job and, during my lunch break, called a divorce lawyer to initiate the process. Michael, seemingly unfazed, responded with bravado, claiming he was fine with it and canceling the lease on his current place. Little did he know that tragedy was about to hit him, and he just hadn't realized it yet. Later, I went back to my parents' place and shared everything with my father. From that point on, everything unfolded according to my plan. A few weeks later, Michael called me in a state of panic, having received an enormous bill. While his shock was understandable, it was only fair, considering the fixed property tax on the $4 million house he had claimed as his own. I casually informed Michael that he should expect to pay around that much for the property tax. However, he appeared utterly clueless, lacking knowledge that paying tax on owned property is common. Normally, my father would have covered the tax if he had received the property. But upon hearing the entire story, my usually calm father was furious. Despite my warnings about my father's strict nature, he declared he can have it if he can afford it, and accepted the property transfer to Michael. To be honest, a part of me wanted Michael to learn a tough lesson, and there was no way he could afford the hefty amount. Frustrated with Michael's persistent pleas, I decided to deliver a final blow. The annual property tax, I revealed, amounted to about $60,000. It dawned on me that Michael always had a mindset of trying to take advantage of his friends, possibly driving them away and leaving him without anyone to teach him common sense. Acknowledging that I may have been a bit unreasonable, I admitted that my once cute perception of Michael had drastically changed. Without any sympathy left, I hung up the phone. Subsequently, Michael couldn't sustain living in the house and faced forced eviction. Realizing he couldn't afford it, my father reverted the property deed back to my name, incurring the gift tax himself. Meanwhile, Michael faced severe consequences. He was fired from his job and charged with unlawfully changing the property deed. He received scoldings from his parents and was shunned by acquaintances. Now jobless and friendless, he barely scraped by in a rundown apartment, working odd jobs. His parents were even considering disowning him. As for me, I've been gradually preparing to take over my father's company. My father once told me that success in business doesn't come from looking for shortcuts. Reflecting on the fact that I almost married Michael, I deeply understand the truth in his words. Inspired by my father's greatness, I push forward every day in my involvement in running the business. I am Emily, aged 35, and for the past decade, I've devoted my life to homemaking. My partner in this journey was Michael, a doctor. Despite our lack of children, we found contentment in our shared existence. However, the tranquility was shattered one day when Michael arrived home late, delivering a proclamation that would mark the end of our 10-year marriage. "It's over for us, Emily," he declared. Bewildered, I questioned him about the sudden revelation. Michael, habitually returning late, dropped a bombshell. He had decided to marry his mistress, and divorce was imminent. Shocked, I exclaimed, "Marry your mistress? What are you talking about?" Michael asserted his decision, emphasizing that our union lacked the foundation of love. Our marriage was orchestrated by his parents, who deemed me a suitable match. We tied the knot hastily, knowing little about each other beyond sharing a common last name. People might call it fate that we shared the same surname, and in the whirlwind of surrounding marriages, I succumbed to the notion marrying him. Our union, though not built on love, endured for a decade. Little did I anticipate that Michael would abruptly opt for a divorce. I confronted him about the betrayal, demanding to know when he started betraying me. Michael insisted it wasn't betrayal, revealing that he met his mistress, a nurse in our hospital, a year ago. Enthralled by her charm and caring nature, he was drawn to her. The revelation left me incredulous. Despite our marriage's lack of love, I never imagined Michael's callous desire to marry another woman. He demeaned our shared history, expressing disdain for my role as a homemaker. His words cut deep, stating that he found me boring and that living with me for 10 years was hell. I agreed to the divorce, shocked at his callousness. We discussed the legalities later, but Michael dropped another bombshell. He never submitted our marriage registration. We were not legally married. We were merely cohabitants. His elaborate scheme, formed during our initial agreement, ensured that he maintained control over all official matters. As the reality sank in, I realized that the life I thought I had built was nothing more than an illusion. Michael had strategically kept our marriage unregistered to secure financial control. The 10 years we spent together seemed like a cruel joke, orchestrated by someone I thought I knew. I was meant to be with you, and you should have rejected the marriage proposal from the beginning. But I couldn't. My parents are stubborn and wouldn't listen. If I had refused, I wondered what would have happened. Besides, I needed a housekeeper. As a busy doctor, I couldn't handle household chores. So I decided to marry you for practical reasons, as a housekeeper. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. You had a good place to live and meals without the burden of work. It seemed like a fair deal, especially since you appeared eager to get married, perhaps influenced by societal expectations. This 10-year relationship was a win-win situation for both of us, or so I thought. But it ends today. You should appreciate the good times we had, but now you have to live on your own without depending on others. And one more thing, don't inform my parents about our situation. If you do anything unnecessary, you know what will happen to your father. He has a contract with the hospital where he works, thanks to our marriage. I'm implying that I could sever that connection as a threat. In other words, I'm warning you not to take any actions I would find undesirable. He laughed, claiming it was my fault for being deceived, leaving me with nothing. However, unbeknownst to him, the one who would be left with nothing was him. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. "What's so funny all of a sudden?" he asked, puzzled. "I can't believe you became a doctor with that kind of knowledge," I retorted. Confused, he questioned, "What do you mean?" I had known about his mistress and the fact that he didn't submit our marriage registration all along. In fact, I had suspected his infidelity for the past 6 months, but lacked evidence to confront him. I had hired a private investigator to look into his affair. The investigator revealed 2 crucial pieces of information. First, there was evidence of my husband entering a hotel with a nurse from his workplace. Second, based on their conversations, there was a possibility that we were not legally married. "What does that mean?" I asked in disbelief. He explained, "I overheard your husband and his mistress at a cafe. They mentioned not needing to worry about alimony or property division because they never submitted a marriage registration." I couldn't believe it. We had been living as a married couple for 10 years, and the revelation that we might not be legally married was shocking. It explained why he never allowed me to handle any official procedures. This is too much. Am I just supposed to accept this? If we were never married from the start, there's nothing. I trailed off, grappling with the reality of our situation. I can do more than you think, I asserted. Confused, my friend asked. What do you mean? I suggested. Let's make him pay for deceiving you for 10 years. First, we need to prepare without him noticing. So, I initiated preparations with the investigator to hold my husband accountable. He had arrogantly claimed, "So what if you knew we were never married from the start? I don't need to take any responsibility." Mocking my supposed pitiful ignorance, he believed he was in the clear. However, I turned the tables on him. "You said I was pitiful for not knowing anything, but it seems you were the one who was pitiful," I retorted. I revealed a legal loophole. Our relationship, though never formally married, was considered a common law relationship on paper. I explained, in a common law relationship, you can actually claim alimony and divide property. Confused, he questioned, "What are these conditions?" I clarified. First, both parties must have the intention to marry. The second is living as if married, including sharing household life for over 3 years. We meet these criteria. I continued, even if you can claim alimony and property division, you're just an unemployed woman, planning to rely on your parents after being kicked out. With a smirk, I assured him, "Didn't I say I was preparing? I've already found a job starting next month, and I've got my eye on a new place." Defeated, he stammered. "But even if you can claim alimony and property division, do you not care what happens to your father if they want to break the contract?" Unfazed, I replied, "Let's see if they'll break a contract just because the doctor's wife of 10 years was a lie. Try saying that to my father and see if we won't be affected." As I took out my phone to inform my parents of the impending end to our relationship, he panicked. "You're not calling your parents, are you?" I calmly stated, "That's exactly what I'm doing. Our parents think we're still married. It's only natural to inform them if this relationship is ending." Surprisingly, he began to apologize to me, realizing the tables had turned. "Please, let me talk to them. Don't call," he pleaded urgently. I raised an eyebrow, frustrated. "Why? You know how strict my parents are. If they find out about this, I'm done." I retorted, "What does that have to do with me? Are you asking me not to tell the truth because your parents are strict? Are you kidding? You could have refused the marriage from the start if you didn't intend to marry. After 10 years of a selfish marriage, you're afraid of your parents finding out. I can't accept such a convenient story. But I can't accept your story either. I'll make sure to tell both your parents and mine," I declared, and without hesitation, I called both sets of parents. All 4 were shocked upon hearing my story, leading to a prompt arrangement of a meeting at our house. "I've heard everything over the phone. Is it true that you pretended to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration? Speak up, you foolish son," his father scolded. His response was a sheepish admission, "It's true. I didn't submit it." His mother intervened. "Why would you do such a thing? Didn't you think about how Emily would feel?" I had no choice, he defended himself. "No choice, you say? How can you even say that? It's actually your fault, Dad and Mom. I didn't want to get married yet. You started looking for a bride on your own, saying it was time I got married. You arranged meetings and tried to force a marriage on me. You're the one who agreed to the marriage, aren't you?" I had to agree. If I had refused, you would have made a fuss about it. "So I decided to get married," he explained, pointing the blame back at his parents. His father questioned, "If you were resolved to marry, why didn't you submit the marriage registration?" He cited an internet story. I read about a man in the same situation. He didn't want to marry but had to because of his parents. He lived a married life without submitting the registration and revealed the truth when he found someone he truly loved. That's appalling. What happened to that guy in the end? I asked. He's now married to the person he loves and has a real marriage. So, I too will marry my girlfriend and have a real marriage, he declared confidently. Then my parents spoke up. "A real marriage, huh? Sure, you might not have had a love marriage, but do you remember what you said at the wedding?" We will never forget to care for each other and build a home full of smiles. What did those words mean to you? What were we shown? We sent our daughter to you hoping for her happiness, but you deceived her for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. Did you build a home full of smiles? Now you're leaving her for another woman. Can someone who acts without a shred of care, even if they change partners, truly have a real marriage? He stammered, attempting to respond, but my father cut him off. I was happy you married our daughter, not just because you were a doctor. I thought she could build a happy home with someone as sincere as you, but it seems we were mistaken and deceived. And you threatened our daughter. If she told us about this, you'd cut off the contract with our company. Seriously. If you're going to threaten our daughter, we'll cut off the contract ourselves. Be warned. We will tell the truth when asked. Why? If you do that, there will be rumors at the hospital, my father warned. His face paled at the unexpected turn of events, and he pleaded, please wait. This is getting out of hand. Let's just talk. But my father-in-law, furious, wasn't having it. Don't mess with us, he declared, grabbing my husband by the collar. We didn't raise you to be such a scoundrel. What were you thinking? Father, please stop. By not submitting the marriage registration, you might have thought you were doing yourself a favor, but because of your selfish actions, Emily was strung along for 10 years. I interjected, my voice firm. What were you thinking, causing such trouble to others? The living room fell silent as my father-in-law confronted my husband with these stern words. Faced with the weight of those accusations, my husband had nothing more to say. I spoke up, addressing my in-laws, Emily and your parents. I'm truly sorry for the trouble caused by this idiot. No, you parents shouldn't apologize. It's not your fault. However, it's partly our responsibility as parents for letting him act this way. For now, we'll take him home and make sure he doesn't continue his reckless behavior. We'll deal with the aftermath properly. We're very sorry for all this, my father-in-law admitted. With that, my husband was taken away by his parents, back to his childhood home. You've been through a lot. For now, you should come back home and rest. We'll think about what to do next later. You don't need to worry about anything right now, my parents assured me, expressing their concern. Thank you, but I won't go back home yet. I still have things I need to do. I declined their offer and chose to stay in my own home. What I had to do was prepare for the final settlement with my now ex-husband, gathering evidence for our common law relationship. I was getting ready to claim alimony and divide our assets. A few weeks later, a meeting with a lawyer was arranged. However, even if I agreed to alimony, my ex-husband couldn't accept the idea of dividing his property. Why should I divide my property? She's been a homemaker for 10 years, never working a day. All the furniture, clothes, food. I paid for everything. Now you're telling me to hand over the money I worked hard for? The furniture I bought? He ranted, unable to accept that his money would be shared with me. The lawyer explained, yes, that's correct. The money you earned and the furniture are subject to property division. Why does it have to be like that? Who did the housework while you were working? Who cooked meals with the groceries you bought? He argued. That's irrelevant now. No, it's very relevant. A homemaker is entitled to property division because housework and childcare have economic value. Speaking as a human, not just a lawyer, do you think housework is something anyone can do? That it's just expected of a homemaker? The reason you could live freely is because of her support. Don't get that wrong, the lawyer asserted. He was taken aback, and in frustration, he said, and this situation is a result of your actions, yet you have the audacity to be selfish. The lawyer responded, what do you say? Never mind. Anyway, she's entitled to half of the assets for property division. That's how it is. Regarding alimony, we intend to claim $100,000 from you, the lawyer continued. $100,000? Why so much for a relationship that wasn't even a marriage? He protested. It's precisely because you weren't married. Normally, alimony claims in common law relationships range from $10,000 to $40,000. However, in your case, you pretended to be married for 10 years and selfishly tried to kick her out when you found someone else. The amount is determined by the severity and duration of your actions. But still, you may think 10 years is just a short time, but it's longer than you realize. During that time, she devoted herself to you, believing you were a married couple. You have no right to complain after betraying her, the lawyer explained, presenting a strong case. Unable to counter this argument, he reluctantly agreed to my demands. I also sent a notice of claim for alimony to his mistress, thanks to the investigator who revealed her identity. As he had said, she was a nurse working at the same hospital. In a panic after being served with the alimony claim from me, she confronted him at the hospital with the notice I had sent. Wait a minute. This isn't what you told me. What do you want? I told you not to talk to me at the hospital. I got this from your wife. You said there wouldn't be any alimony because we weren't married. What's this all about? She questioned him. I later learned that their confrontation at the hospital had sparked quite a scene. Okay. Let's talk about this later, not here. There are too many people around. We'll both be in trouble if this turns into a rumor. He tried to defuse the situation. I don't care about that. I can't pay this kind of alimony. You said it was okay, so you should pay it for me. What? I won't pay a penny. You were the one who wanted this relationship. You said I was the only one for you, that you wanted to marry me. Hey, quiet down. Everyone can hear us. Just so you know, I'm not in the wrong here. If you want to make amends with your wife, do it yourself. Tell her I don't owe her a penny, that you'll take care of everything. Wait, hold on. This exchange led to the revelation of their affair to the entire hospital. It quickly became the talk of the place. Then, the final blow was my father's request to the hospital. I apologize, but we would like to terminate our contract at the end of next month. The hospital, aware of the rumors, asked my father, "Excuse me for asking, but is the reason for canceling the contract related to Dr. Michael's affair? It's already become a rumor." Yes, a nurse presumed to be involved caused quite a scene. I never imagined he had been pretending to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. I never expected it to turn out like this. You mean he never submitted the registration? Weren't you aware that he hadn't submitted the marriage registration? All we knew was that he, being married, had an affair. What do you mean he didn't submit the marriage registration? With my father's request, it was revealed that he had been deceiving me for 10 years by not submitting the marriage registration. This news spread among the other nurses. Dr. Michael deceived his wife for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration, and he had an affair with a nurse. How low? How could he do that? Can someone really not notice for 10 years? Apparently, Emily's maiden name was the same, and he managed all the official paperwork. That's scary. The rumors spread not only among hospital staff, but also to patients, and both Michael and his mistress received cold stares. Unable to endure, they soon resigned from the hospital. As my father told me, "Did you manage to get the alimony?" Yes, I received payments from both him and his mistress. She refused to pay until the end, claiming she was deceived. But the lawyer made it clear her argument wouldn't hold, and she reluctantly agreed to pay. That's good. What about you, Dad? Did the contract get canceled after all? No, that's off the table. He resigned, and since our company is trusted, the hospital asked us not to cancel the contract. We couldn't cancel it after they asked like that. That's a relief. Then I started a new life in a new place and was living happily. About a year and a half later, my ex-husband contacted me. "Is it true you got remarried?" I had married a man I met at work, and somehow he had found out. I wondered whose number this was, going through the trouble of changing your number just to contact me. Just answer my question. Yes, I got married. You betrayed me. Betray. We were never legally married, so I didn't think it would matter to you, right? That's a different matter. Indeed, things are different now. We're completely separated, so my marriage has nothing to do with you. Is that why you contacted me? After I said this, he seemed at a loss for words. Then he taunted, "Of course, you're still unmarried, since you probably haven't submitted a marriage registration again. You're that kind of woman." But things weren't as he imagined. Unfortunately for him, my husband isn't the kind of person to do such terrible things. He knows all about your story, so to ensure I wouldn't feel anxious, we went to the office together to submit the registration. Sadly for you, things aren't as you thought. I can somewhat understand your wish for me to be unhappy, considering your own misery. But sorry, we're happily married. I told him this and hung up the phone. What kind of life he leads now, I don't know. But unless he changes his selfish nature, it's unlikely he'll ever find happiness. Everyone aspires to be the best at something, but when this confidence transforms into taking others for granted, the universe might deliver a lesson. Understanding that there's always someone better out there is the key to humility, which is what truly defines the strongest individuals. My name is Mina, and I've been married to my husband Thomas for 2 years. When we decided to tie the knot, Thomas warned me about his troublesome sister, suggesting she might become a burden. As an only child, the prospect of having a sister excited me. But Thomas's words also sparked anxiety and curiosity about the kind of trouble she could bring. Now, 2 years into our marriage, I fully comprehend and have experienced what Thomas meant. I was born into a relatively wealthy family where my father runs a mid-sized trading company. He is well-informed and progressive in his thinking. My parents always respected my decisions, creating an environment where I could freely explore my interests. The 2008 Lehman Brothers collapse, when I was just an 11-year-old elementary school student, intrigued me. Witnessing the significant impact it had on the world and Japan, I became fascinated by how a disruption in the flow of funds could cause a global panic. This sparked my interest in researching financial circulation. Naturally curious and apparently quite intelligent, my parents had me take an IQ test, and the results exceeded the normal range. As I delved into this newfound interest, many aspects became clear, but my curiosity never waned throughout middle and high school. Continuing my exploration of this topic, I pursued a major in college that allowed me to deepen my understanding. As I delved further, my eagerness to apply my knowledge led me to venture into day trading, encouraged by my professor, who highlighted day trading as an excellent way to experience capital flow firsthand. I embraced the challenge, aware of the need for careful management to avoid debt. My research efforts were extensive as I identified statistically favorable stocks for day trading. Armed with a modest sum from all the allowances I had saved up, I engaged in buying and selling the same stock within the same day, with the goal of capitalizing on quick results. My predictions proved accurate, and though the initial increase was modest, I steadily grew my funds by repeating this process and gradually increasing my investment. In a year, I managed to amplify the initial amount by more than 50 times. While the sum may not have been significant on a larger scale, my primary concern wasn't about the magnitude of the achievement. What mattered most to me was whether the answers I had derived from my research were correct. During my university seminar, I encountered a student named Thomas, known for his analytical skills. Our shared perspectives on various topics drew us close, and after graduation, despite my initial plan to join my father's company, Thomas proposed an alternative path. He identified a job at a foreign investment firm, a proposition he presented on the day of our graduation ceremony. Following a celebration, Thomas confessed his feelings, and without hesitation, I said yes. His intelligence had always been a source of comfort, and his understanding nature made me feel at ease. As we both embarked on new journeys, gaining experience, our relationship continued to strengthen. Inspired by the concept of trade at my father's company, I dedicated myself to researching foreign companies to gain an advantage in negotiations and established a robust foundation for our deals. Thomas, with his inherent analytical skills, excelled in identifying profitable investment opportunities, earning high praise within his company. Despite our busy schedules, we maintained our connection through dates that provided refreshing breaks before diving back into our respective work. Over the 5 years of our relationship, we became indispensable to each other, evolving into a reliable support system. Deeply immersed in our exciting careers, we decided it was the right time to take the next step. Thomas proposed, expressing his desire to spend the rest of his life with me. Without hesitation, I accepted his proposal, eager to begin our life together. However, when it was time for a family meeting, Thomas disclosed something important about his sister, Alice. According to Thomas, Alice, his sister 2 years younger, was known for being challenging. He cautioned that she might cause some discomfort or inconvenience. Alice, exceptionally bright from a young age, developed a competitive spirit, looking down on others, including Thomas, whom she considered inferior. Even though Thomas was regarded as a prodigy, Alice claimed superiority, joining a rival investment and consulting firm to compete with him in her career. Thomas was worried that his engagement might affect Alice's pride, as she always sought to prove herself superior. Having no close friends and seemingly without a significant other, Alice appeared to harbor insecurities, masked by a brave face. Thomas was concerned about how she might react, fearing that she would intensify her efforts to demonstrate her strength in the face of our engagement. Attempting to reassure Thomas with a light-hearted "it's okay" proved ineffective, as his worry seemed unending. This only heightened my curiosity about his intense sister, Alice. Finally meeting her at a family gathering, her sharp, intelligent beauty was unmistakable, though a certain coldness lingered. Whether that was intrinsic to her nature or a result of my preconceived notions, I couldn't discern. Thomas's parents, in contrast, were kind and humorous, putting me at ease about getting along with them. However, beyond the initial greeting, Alice remained silent, merely eating her meal while scrutinizing me as if assessing my worth. After the meeting, as everyone was leaving, Alice pulled me aside. Curious about the person I would be, she expressed disappointment, dismissing me as just a girl who secured a job at her parents' company and likely slacking off. She asserted her financial prowess, claiming to move large amounts of money and make significant profits, placing herself on a level far superior to mine. According to Alice, Thomas settling for someone like me was disappointing, and she concluded by stating that today's gain was realizing how much I fell short of her standards. Stunned and unsure how to respond, Alice left the room, leaving me there. Thomas returned, noticing I hadn't left with Alice. Concerned, he asked if something had happened. In response to Alice's jab, I laughed it off, assuring Thomas that it was just a minor comment. Thomas apologized for his sister's rudeness, but I reassured him that I wasn't bothered. It didn't hurt, but I couldn't help but wonder what would happen the next time we met, particularly at the wedding. Strangely, I found myself looking forward to it, anticipating the interesting dynamics that might unfold. Surprised by my response, Thomas and I went on to have a grand wedding attended by family, friends, and colleagues from both sides. We pledged our eternal love and reveled in the joyous occasion, but Alice appeared grumpy and irritated right from the start. Thomas had mentioned that Alice had neither friends nor a romantic partner, so I could somewhat understand her feelings, finding it slightly amusing. During a break for a wardrobe change, as I waited for the staff to assist me, Alice entered seemingly without reason. She remarked that my happiness was only for the day and predicted that, as a plain woman, I wouldn't get the spotlight after the wedding, insinuating that I would just leech off Thomas' earnings. Unfazed, I couldn't comprehend how anyone could be satisfied with that. She declared her intentions to climb even higher on her own and find someone better than Thomas for an even grander wedding. With that rapid-fire monologue, a self-satisfied Alice left without giving me a chance to respond. As the staff walked in just after Alice's departure, I burst into laughter at the timing. Apologizing to the puzzled staff, I started changing, realizing that Alice knew how to keep things interesting. Since the wedding, I had no contact with her. I anticipated seeing her again, perhaps at Christmas when visiting my in-laws, but an unexpected connection with Alice arose sooner than expected. My father decided to seek external consulting for asset preservation and expansion at his company. Although I offered to handle it, he insisted on bringing in outside expertise, choosing a specific firm. Upon hearing the familiar name of the consulting firm during negotiations at my father's company, a sense of recognition washed over me, but I couldn't immediately place it. To my surprise, Alice was among the representatives of the firm, and the realization dawned that it was her company. We exchanged surprised glances, but silently agreed to act as if we were meeting for the first time, keeping our sister-in-law relationship a secret from the other team members. When I discussed the situation with Thomas at home, he already knew about it, expressing frustration. He suggested I step away from the project, but I found the situation amusing and laughed it off. Despite my amusement, I had to maintain professionalism during the negotiations. I pointed out flaws and inadequacies in their proposals, supported by logical reasoning that unsettled them. Alice tried to counter with past examples and mathematical evidence, but my responses exposed their weak points, leaving them silent. The meeting ended in my favor, with the other team agreeing to come up with a second proposal for the next meeting. As I relaxed with coffee after they left, I received a phone call meant for me. Answering the phone, it was Alice. She acknowledged my success, but declared that someone as excellent as her couldn't be bested by me. With a parting shot about not needing guidance from someone like me, she hung up. Bursting into laughter, I held the phone, drawing curious glances from nearby colleagues. From that point on, I took full control of the meetings, with their team often scrambling to respond to my points. Alice attempted comebacks but consistently fell short, her frustration visible. When I shared this with Thomas, he revealed that Alice had never been outdone by anyone before. Additionally, he mentioned that Alice had recently faced rejection from a guy she liked, compounding her irritation. I couldn't help but let out a surprised "huh" and stifle my laughter as the consulting project finally concluded successfully. The opposing team leader thanked us, expressing that they had learned a lot. And as everyone dispersed, Alice and I found ourselves alone. Alice, however, was not satisfied with the outcome. "I'm not satisfied with how things went. I'll make sure to get the better of you next time. Just so you know, I am more excellent. I even bought a tower mansion at my age. Only someone as outstanding as me could afford a brand new tower mansion," Alice declared, emphasizing her success as an investor. With that statement, Alice left, and Thomas later confirmed that what she said was true. Alice had indeed found success as an investor and recently bought a tower mansion to live on her own. While acknowledging her undeniable talent and the achievement within her reach, I genuinely wanted to congratulate her. A few days later, on the weekend, I had some business at a tower mansion. As I stopped at a certain mid-level floor, a door opened, and a resident stepped out. The resident and I locked eyes and both exclaimed in surprise. It was Alice. "Why are you here? If you're not invited to the party, did you come to clean?" I questioned. It seemed that today was the day of Alice's celebrity home party, as she had mentioned. "Not at all. I'm here to deliver something to an acquaintance on this floor." "You have an acquaintance here, and you came down from where?" Alice replied. "Well, my home is on the top floor of this mansion. Naturally, I had to come down." I countered, reminding her that she and Thomas lived in a single-story house because Thomas couldn't handle heights. Alice revealed that the tower mansion was her office and workshop. As we argued loudly in the hallway, a voice behind us asked, "Alice, what's going on?" Alice turned and said, "Sorry, Senior." The woman who had spoken and 3 other women looked at us with concern. "I apologize for not greeting you downstairs. I was just dealing with..." Alice seemed at a loss for words. The woman Alice called Senior looked at me, searching her memory, Anne exclaimed in surprise, "Aren't you Maya?" Alice was visibly confused. The senior explained, "Don't you know? This is Mrs. Mia, our new external board director starting this month. She's also known as the investment goddess whom Alice admires." Alice was speechless at this unexpected revelation, and the senior continued, "Also, she owns a significant share of your company, which made her a board director." Alice was overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. The senior added, "Alice, while extremely talented, has a poor reputation regarding teamwork and attitude towards colleagues. If she can't improve, she can't continue working in her current role." Alice was already knocked out by the harsh reality, kneeling and collapsed on the floor. Later, Thomas told me that Alice, once a fierce wolf, had become a small dog. It seemed she finally understood that there's always someone above her. Reflecting on my previous attitude, I felt a bit guilty for finding it all so amusing. Alice has become a lesson for me to never underestimate anyone and to treat others with respect. Thomas apologized for not being more involved in these events, but it's not his responsibility at all. His concern showed his good nature, and I love him all the more for it. My current hope is to start a family with Thomas soon. I can't wait to enjoy life as a family of 3. If Alice changes her mindset and broadens her perspective, she'll surely find friends and a partner soon. One night, I had a dream of a family of 3. And by the end of next year, we'll be a family of 5, triplets from the Cabbage Patch. I woke up sweating but couldn't help laughing at the prospect.
My name is Karen, and I'm 25 years old. 6 months ago, my grandfather, who raised me, passed away. Today, the lawyer will open his will. I was visiting my grandfather's house with my sister, Susan, who is 4 years older and my only family. Our parents died in an accident 20 years ago, and since then, our grandparents raised us. After my grandmother passed away from an illness a few years ago, my grandfather's spirits declined year by year, and he frequently fell ill. Concerned, I lived in an apartment near his house and often checked on him. "You're a grown woman. It's unbecoming to keep coming back home," my grandfather would say, but he always laughed cheerfully nonetheless. Then one day, as I visited like I usually did, I found him lying in pain at the entrance. Panicked, I called the ambulance, but my grandfather passed away just like that. "Hey, what are you daydreaming about? At least prepare some tea." My sister's voice brought me back to reality. "Right, the lawyer will be here soon," I responded. Heading to the kitchen, I saw Susan lazily stretching out her legs on the mat and yawning. I could still smell her strong perfume even in the kitchen, a bit away, and I made a face. "She's the same as always," I murmured, placing the kettle on the stove. Susan had always cared only about herself. Once she hit her teens, she started dyeing her hair and hanging out with delinquents, always demanding money without working, even when she caused trouble and our grandparents had to apologize on her behalf. She was unperturbed. I, being the quiet one, often dealt with the fallout. She hadn't changed much even as an adult, drifting around with unstable jobs. I knew she had been asking our grandfather for money whenever I wasn't around. It was easy to imagine she would find this all too troublesome if it weren't for the inheritance. "Aw, you must be the lawyer. Thanks for coming today," I heard Susan's high-pitched formal voice, indicating the lawyer had arrived. I hurriedly placed tea leaves into the teapot and headed toward the entrance. "Thank you for coming today." I had met the lawyer at the funeral. His eyes were as kind as my grandfather's, and a lawyer's badge shone brightly on his chest. After offering incense in front of my grandfather's portrait, he took a sip of the tea I served and then took out my grandfather's will. It had been entrusted to him while my grandfather was still alive. The content was as follows: my elder sister Susan was to inherit $20 million in cash, and I, the younger daughter, was to inherit the house and the land it sits on. Upon hearing this, Susan burst out laughing. $20 million in cash for the elder daughter and only an old house for the younger one? How hilarious! It's just right for someone as plain as you. It's not just the house, there's also the land, I retorted. Susan laughed snidely. The value of this land in such a godforsaken place is hardly surprising. I would have preferred cash. I guess Grandpa must have had a soft spot for me after all. I can't deny that I was a bit shocked. I suppose my grandfather wanted me to protect his beloved house and land where he spent his life with my grandmother. A house and land, that's pretty awesome, isn't it? Brian, my boyfriend, exclaimed in surprise after hearing my story. I shook my head, implying it wasn't as great as it sounded. Not really. My sister inherited $20 million in cash. That's more impressive. Saying it out loud, I felt a sense of emptiness, even though I was being modest. Verbalizing it felt like an acknowledgement. Wow, beautiful and rich. She's got the better deal, Brian said insensitively. Realizing his gaffe, he quickly added, your comfort means more to me than money, Karen. Brian has been my boyfriend since I started working. We met at a social event, and being of the same age, we clicked well. I introduced him to my grandfather and my sister. While he hasn't proposed yet, I have been considering marriage. Today was our first date in a while, and I ended up telling Brian about my inheritance. I suppose it was because I thought he would become my husband someday. Little did I know I would come to regret this. A few days later, I visited the family home I had inherited from my grandfather. I intended to clean and sort out his belongings. The property was large, but the house was modest. I figured I could manage it on my own. As I looked around the house, I pondered. It's close to my workplace. Maybe I should move here. Living here leisurely with a cat doesn't sound too bad. There would be no rent to pay, and while there might be maintenance costs, I've been working hard and saving, so it shouldn't be a problem. Maybe someday with Brian. Feeling embarrassed at the thought, I shook my head vigorously and rolled up my sleeves to begin cleaning. Just then, I received a call. My sister's name appeared on my smartphone screen. Sis, what's up? Hey, Karen, having fun all by yourself in that old house? My sister seemed to be drunk. She always had a unique way of extending her words, but today it was particularly bad. Are you drinking? It's still afternoon, I pointed out with a sigh. Oh, you're such a goody two-shoes. She sighed exaggeratedly. She had definitely been drinking. I was thinking about moving here eventually, I answered, hoping to end the conversation quickly. Really? I'm enjoying a suite in a luxury hotel right now, my sister said, raising her voice in a somewhat exaggerated way. Guess who I'm with right now? I have no idea. Boring. It's that kind of attitude that'll make Brian dislike you, she taunted. I'm sorry, Karen. I was flabbergasted when Brian's voice took over the line. The sudden intervention threw me off balance, dizzying question marks popping up in my head, but I pushed away my imagination, though a disgusting scenario had already formed in my mind. Surprised. Huh? My sister's mean-spirited voice chimed in. Ever since I introduced him to her, she had found Brian quite a catch. She boasted about how she had been attracted to him since then, knew where he worked because of me, and approached him as soon as he left work. He came along readily when she asked, telling her she was hundreds of times more attractive than me. I listened in stunned silence. Karen, I'm really sorry, Brian's voice again. Tell me it's a mistake, I tried to say, but the words wouldn't come. As a man, I had to take this opportunity. What? I do feel bad about it, but come on, It's impossible to resist a beautiful woman who has $20 million, right? The way he spoke, as if asking me to understand, drained my emotions. I felt a cold sensation like my blood was being drained from me. You know what? I don't need a man like you. I could hear my sister laughing uproariously in the background. The voice on the phone changed back to her. Well, that's how it is. From now on, let's not consider ourselves sisters, okay? I wouldn't want you turning to me just because you're broke. With those words, she ended the call, overwhelmed by emotions that had lagged behind. All I could do was cry out. 5 years have passed since then. I had a cat in my lap, dozing off in front of my laptop. The cat purred contentedly in its sleep. Today was my day off, but I still had a bit of work I brought home. Oh no, this won't get the work done, I said, feeling guilty but having to move the cat off my lap. Just as I reached out, my phone started to ring. An unfamiliar number was displayed. Thinking it could be work-related, I answered the call without any suspicion. Hello? Karen, long time no see. I instantly knew who it was and froze. The distinctive way of speaking was unmistakably my sister's. It's you, Karen, isn't it? I can tell just from your initial hello. After all, I'm your big sister. 5 years had passed, making Susan 34. A smirk formed at the corner of my mouth at her unchanging way of talking. You're just the same. By the way, I came home and there's a hotel standing. Did you sell the house? That's none of your business. Oh, come on. It's quite a grand hotel. Huh? You must have made a good chunk of change. Huh? Getting fed up. I was about to end the call when she started to chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she had blown through the inheritance in about 2 years. Now she even had a considerable amount of debt. Even Brian, who she's still hanging around with, seemed to be drowning in debt. I was speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. So, lend me some money, Susan yelled. I've always wondered why Grandpa distributed his estate that way. I answered calmly. But on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I understood. I started talking slowly, recalling the events of 5 years ago. When Brian broke up with me, I was crushed. After crying my heart out, I sat dazed in my room, staring into space. I'm such a fool, I murmured. As large tears began to spill again, my gaze fell on a painting I had made as a child and had gifted to my grandfather. He had framed it and kept it hanging lovingly. Rising unsteadily, I picked up the painting. Grandpa. Nostalgia and loneliness welled up, and tears started to come again. Suddenly, something dropped from the back of the frame. Picking it up, I saw it was a fresh sheet of note paper addressed to me. I remembered how, when I was little, I used to stick notes on the back of this frame and exchange secret messages with my grandfather. It was like a family journal. Knowing that I was to inherit the house, he probably figured I'd find this note. I'm glad I noticed. I shuddered at the thought that I might have missed it. The letter was dated just before my grandfather passed. To Karen. I knew you'd definitely notice this letter. Right now, you're probably wondering why I distributed my estate in such a manner, cash to your sister and an old house and land for you. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not the case. Despite any claims of favoritism, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, who cared for me till the end. I finally understood what had been bothering me. No matter what, Grandpa thought more of me. I was deeply hurt by Susan's words at that time, despite having loved my grandfather more. A kind of jealousy. I continued to read the letter. But Susan would not be satisfied with a regular division, even as her grandfather. I must admit she's terribly greedy. Exactly, Grandpa, I thought. She even took my boyfriend from me. That's what I wanted to tell him in my heart. That's why I arranged it this way. If at first glance Susan appears to have received the better deal, she won't pay attention to your share. The value of this land in our area is continuously increasing due to ongoing urban development. As of the time I'm writing this, it's not worth Susan's $20 million yet, but the value will surely increase in the future. You can live here if you're attached to it or sell it when its value rises enough to make a good profit. All I want is for you to be happy. When I finished conveying the contents of the letter, Susan clicked her tongue and said, "Hag. I lived in that house for a while, but when my marriage was settled, I decided to sell the house. Just like grandfather's letter said, the land value had risen enough anyway. I'm never lending you money." Susan seemed frustrated, but, as if she had a good idea, she said, "Right. If you want, I can give Brian back to you. So help your sister. It's a good deal, right?" At that moment, I felt something snap inside me. Enough is enough. You've been taken care of by Grandpa, and yet you haven't shown a hint of gratitude. I despise you for that, and you're not my sister anymore. Besides, I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good. I said what I needed to say and hung up. I quickly set up call blocking. My cat, who had been cowering on the bed, looked up at me with wide eyes. I quickly picked up my cat and said, "I'm sorry." After that, it seems Susan contacted Brian, and they both stormed into our old house. Did they try to return Brian to me? There's a respectable in there now. But they must have misunderstood something and were shouting that they were my relatives, even though I had sold the land and had nothing to do with it. It's simple for those two. They thought, Karen sold the land and an inn was built. She must be the owner. Of course, the staff reported them to the police. The two of them were arrested because they had destroyed several items in the inn. Furthermore, it was discovered that they had been committing marriage fraud for money in the past. It seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I was able to prove that I had no involvement quickly, as we were estranged, and I was released. As my husband, who came to pick me up, and I were walking through the station, we heard screaming and turned our gaze. There were Susan and Brian, looking completely different. Fortunately, they didn't notice us. Both of them had messy hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the two people I remembered. Especially Susan, who never skipped her makeup and fashion, looked even more different. They were probably being moved to a different location. As I watched the two of them, filled with a sense of melancholy, my husband and I locked eyes. I grabbed the hand he extended, and we left the police station. "Are you okay?" My husband, always concerned, looked at me with gentle eyes. "I'm okay. I have you and this little one," I said, touching my fairly noticeable belly and smiling back. In my belly, a new member of our family was growing. Money is important, but there's something even more valuable. That's what I want to teach our child, with my husband by my side.
She proved to be such a nuisance, always obstructing my path. Right up until the bitter end, my husband spat out those words. It made me question if he was truly human at all. He was insufferable, not only as a parent, but as a person. "I'm sorry. I will avenge you," I declared, standing before the funeral attendees, reading the letter left by my daughter. As I read, my husband's face turned ashen. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My father-in-law's angry voice echoed. The revenge was about to commence. "My name is Elma, a 40-year-old housewife. I've been married to Carl for 15 years. We met in high school, becoming classmates in our sophomore year. We started talking after becoming desk mates and grew closer while working together on a school festival project. After the festival ended, he confessed, and we started dating. We continued dating through college. Carl moved out on his own, so I often visited his apartment. After graduation, we both started working and got busy, but we still made time for dates and meals out. Once we both started earning more, we enjoyed traveling during our holidays. I cherished those trips we took while dating. 3 years into our working lives, we decided to get married. We had saved enough for a wedding and had settled into our jobs, so it felt like the right time. Since we had dated since high school, we already knew each other's families, which made meeting the parents and house visits go smoothly. Many people attended our wedding, including our high school classmates, celebrating our union. Afterward, we started our married life, which was full of joy. Even though we'd been together for over 8 years since high school, we felt fresh and excited in our married life. It felt real when my last name changed to his. We were having a smooth marriage. 3 years later, our daughter Rosa was born. "Wow, she looks like an angel, so cute," Carl exclaimed, holding our newborn daughter. "I'll work my butt off to protect our family," he declared. "Thank you, be our rock," I replied. "You can count on me," he assured confidently. With a new member to protect, my husband seemed larger than life and very reliable. After giving birth, I worked part-time in his company. The first reason was to have more time with our child. Raising her was incredibly joyful. Every little milestone, like crawling or walking, was a moment of excitement, and I took countless photos and videos, like any proud parent. When I told Carl, he'd say, "I wish I could have seen that," with a tinge of regret. We spent blissful days playing with our daughter on his days off. As Rosa grew, she became conversational. We loved taking her to different places and letting her have various experiences. We were excited about thinking of her future dreams and the path she would take. But everything changed when Rosa was in the 3rd grade. I was working part-time when suddenly I got a call from the hospital. Rosa had collapsed during class. In a state of panic, I hurried to the hospital. My husband left work early to join me, and together we listened to the doctor's solemn words. That's when the shocking truth hit us like a tidal wave. Our daughter had a rare disease. Depending on the treatment, she probably had about a year to live, the doctor explained. My mind went blank. My daughter was burdened with an incurable illness. All that awaited us was the use of medication to ease the symptoms, with no guarantee of halting the relentless progression of the disease. We were devastated, grappling with the harsh reality of why such a small child had to endure this cruel fate. As time passed, her condition worsened. 6 months later, walking became a challenge, and she could no longer attend school. Our days were consumed by hospital visits and lying in bed at home. Gradually, she became bedridden. I had to quit my part-time job to care for her full-time. It was a necessary sacrifice, as anything could happen while I was away. Supporting her became our top priority. Around this time, my husband's demeanor underwent a drastic change. He easily fell into bad moods, and the atmosphere at home grew tense. When I welcomed him home with dinner, he'd respond with irritation, questioning my choice of fish. His complaints about every little thing persisted. The house felt peaceful and calm when it was just my daughter and me, but anxiety crept in whenever he was around. His irritability escalated, and he started coming home late, citing overtime work. Strangely, I felt relief when he stayed out late. The mental exhaustion lifted. Yet, I couldn't shake the loneliness. He had stopped caring about our daughter's well-being. When I implored him to talk to her more, he dismissed it, claiming fatigue and declaring that taking care of her during the day was enough. 2 years had passed since her diagnosis, and she continued to fight against her illness with unwavering spirit. Despite her strength, my husband refused to acknowledge her efforts. Instead, his overtime increased, and he started staying out overnight without a message to me. The days without him felt strangely comfortable, even when he was home. Our interactions were minimal, and he seemed to sense the tension, avoiding unnecessary conversations. Strangely, my daughter, in the midst of her struggle, noticed the growing distance between us. "Did you and Dad fall out?" she asked one day. "You hardly ever talk when you're together, right?" "Most of the time." I could hear voices, and it sounded like they were arguing. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry you, but it's okay. We're not on bad terms, really." "Yes, true. Dad's just really busy with work, so when he's home, he's resting. That's why I don't talk to him much so he can get some rest." I reassured our daughter. "Oh, I see," she responded, a little relieved but still seeming sad that her dad wasn't talking to her much. "Did Dad start to dislike me after I got sick?" she asked with a hint of worry. "That's not true at all. A parent can't hate their child. Like I said, he's just busy with work. Don't worry, he doesn't hate you, okay?" I comforted her. After putting our daughter to bed and leaving her room, I sighed. Why am I causing her to worry like this? She's in a life or death situation, and I'm troubling her with this. Gathering my courage, I spoke to my husband when he came home. "Hey, Rosa is feeling lonely. She's wondering if you started to dislike her after she got sick," I admitted. My husband, who had been listening reluctantly, seemed surprised that our daughter would say such a thing and finally looked at me. "Yes, she did. So please, even if it's just a little, talk to her. She's lived past the life expectancy she was given, so it wouldn't be strange if we lost her anytime. Let's make sure neither of you has any regrets, okay?" I pleaded. "I got it," he said begrudgingly and in a low voice. The next day, being Sunday, I deliberately created time for just my husband and daughter to be together. I went out to the store for a couple of hours. When I returned home, I asked him, "Did you get to talk to Rosa?" He replied, "Yeah, we talked about various things." I was glad if it was for our daughter's sake, but then my husband started to get ready to go out. "Are you going somewhere?" I inquired. "Yeah, I'm going out to eat with a friend. Why don't we all have dinner together as a family?" I suggested. "I've been invited, so I can't say no. I've done my part by talking to Rosa. It's time for you to let me go." Saying that, he left the house, leaving me puzzled. What does he mean by "let me go"? I felt like nothing had been resolved. Maybe my husband was just going through the motions out of obligation. At that moment, I decided to stop expecting anything from him. It was enough if I cherished our daughter. That's what I thought. I focused more on making conversation with her. Then, one day, my husband came home in a bad mood. "Hey, get dinner ready quickly," he demanded. I had stopped trying to say anything to my husband, so I prepared dinner, put it in front of him, and was about to go to our daughter's room when he stopped me. "Hey, pack a week's worth of clothes in the duffel bag. I've got a business trip. Make sure you pack all the essentials, like the razor too." After saying that, he went to take a bath without even clearing his dishes. Why do I have to do this? But surely if the bag wasn't packed by the time he got out of the bath, he would get pretty mad, and if he raised his voice, it would worry our daughter. If she woke up, I sighed and went into his room to pack the clothes into the duffel bag. Well, it's a relief. He'll be gone on a business trip for a week. With him gone, I can relax. I packed the bag and left it in his room. The next morning, my husband left without thanking me or saying anything. That annoyed me, but I decided to let myself do as I pleased. First, I called my parents to come and see our daughter. If my husband is away for a week, my folks can stay over without any worry. They seemed torn, happy to see their granddaughter, but saddened to see her bedridden. They were all smiles in front of her. But once she fell asleep, their faces were filled with pain and loneliness. "It really is unfair of God," they said. "Why couldn't it be an old-timer like me instead of a good kid like Rosa?" My parents stayed until the very last minute before my husband was due back. As time went on, Rosa's condition worsened, and she had to be hospitalized. I was gripped with fear that the inevitable might be near. I visited her in the hospital every day, but my husband never came. Instead, when he returned home early, he sent angry messages on WhatsApp, upset about dinner not being ready. At this point, beyond sighing, I thought it might be better without a husband who couldn't cherish his own daughter. However, his work, painful as it was to admit, allowed me these moments with her. Not only my parents but also my in-laws came to visit her often at the hospital. Rosa always seemed happy when someone came to see her. We even celebrated her 12th birthday in the hospital room, where the nurses prepared a cake, and we all celebrated together. But about a month after her birthday, Rosa's condition worsened, and she passed away. I was devastated, breaking down in tears. The reality shattered my emotions. My parents tried to comfort me, but they ended up crying with me. Still, we had to see Rosa off properly. Together with my parents, I arranged and prepared for the funeral. There were things I had to do, all for Rosa. I managed to hold back my tears and proceed with the funeral arrangements. We arrived at the funeral parlor early before the other mourners. My husband, irritable about having to get up early after coming back from his business trip the day before, was infuriating. He hadn't been reachable when Rosa passed away, and he had the gall to say, "I was on a business trip. Even if you had contacted me, I could have made it back." He tried to light a cigarette in frustration. "Go to the smoking area, please," I said sharply. Tutting, he looked irritated. After I called him out, standing by the coffin on his way to smoke, he said something awful to our sleeping daughter. "You were such a pain, always in my way, right to the end." My husband spat out these cruel words as if they were nothing. Is he really human? He was the worst, not just as a parent, but as a person. I was rendered speechless by the horrible things he said. I couldn't move from the spot until my husband walked towards the smoking area. When I came to, I went straight to the coffin. "I'm sorry. I will take revenge in your place," I told my daughter, steeling myself with determination. I could never forgive him. Then the funeral began. Unbelievably, my husband, who had just said such terrible things, pretended to cry in front of the relatives, saying Rosa's name as tears streamed down his face. I knew it was an act because I saw him apply eye drops before walking up to the coffin. The relatives, not knowing any better, misunderstood and started crying too. Unforgivable. I would reveal his true nature no matter what. As the funeral was drawing to a close, it was time to read the letter left by my daughter. "What? There's a letter?" My husband was clearly surprised, not having known about it. "Yes, there is. I have to properly convey the words she left behind to everyone." I stood before the funeral attendees and began to read my daughter's letter aloud at the microphone. The letter was mostly words of gratitude to me for the care I had given her. With each word I read, tears came and I choked up. The relatives also started to cry along. But as I got to the part about my husband, I took a deep breath. "To Dad," I read, as the tears naturally stopped. "Against Mom, who was always by my side, you seemed to avoid coming home as if you were avoiding us. Even when you came home, all I could hear was your voice yelling at her in my room. Dad used to make time to play with me when I was little, taking me on drives to all sorts of places. But after I got sick and became bedridden, Dad seemed like a completely different person. Mom always pretended to be strong in front of me, but I could tell she was really struggling with how Dad was behaving. It hurt me, thinking maybe it was my fault things turned out this way. But it seems that wasn't the case. Remember the day Mom went shopping, and it was just Dad and me at home. You came to my room and talked to me. Then, maybe because Mom asked you to, I was so happy. It felt like the old Dad had come back. But then, thinking I was asleep, you took the phone call. You were talking to a woman. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I know everything. You were planning a week-long trip. Did you enjoy the Disney trip you went on behind our backs, and you told that woman on the phone that you loved her?" As I read my daughter's letter aloud, the room buzzed with tension. My husband stood there, pale as a ghost. "What the hell are you doing?" My father-in-law's angry voice boomed. The revenge had begun. My husband just stood there, speechless, stuttering. Ah! My father-in-law grabbed him by the collar and yelled, "You fool!" before striking him across the face. My husband, staggering, denied the affair, saying, "It's not what it looks like. There must be some mistake." "What's the mistake?" "Rosa would never lie, but I haven't had an affair." My husband stuck to his denials, holding the microphone. I've already caught you. Stop with the futile resistance. Yes, I had seen my daughter's letter beforehand and hired a private investigator. I had gathered plenty of evidence of my husband's affair. I showed the photo on my smartphone to everyone at the funeral. All the relatives attending glared at my husband. How could you go on an affair trip when your own child's life was hanging by a thread? You're finished as a human being. I didn't raise you to be such a terrible adult. Mom, Dad, you're no son of ours anymore. We disown you. My husband just collapsed on the spot, trying to escape the pain. I didn't want to face the reality that my daughter had become like that. What are you even saying? That's no excuse for having an affair. And if that were true, you would have spent more time with Rosa. Don't lie now when we've come so far. And I heard from your parents. You were asking them for money for Rosa's medical expenses because it was so costly. I never heard a word about it. That means you were using the money your parents sent for your own pleasure, right? You exploited your daughter's illness to collect money and have an affair, didn't you? Don't give me that. How dare you do such low things and then talk about suffering? Rosa was the one suffering the most, fighting desperately to survive her illness. To have a father like you, Rosa was the one to be pitied. You're not wanted at this funeral. Get out of here right now. I shouted at my husband with all my might. He fell on his butt, let out a small yelp, and then hurriedly ran away from the place. After that, I reset and continued with my daughter's funeral. When it was over, my in-laws apologized deeply and offered to help with the divorce and alimony in any way they could. I proceeded with the divorce and demanded alimony through a lawyer introduced by my father-in-law. But that wasn't enough for me. I took the house my husband had bought and also told everyone at his workplace about what he had done. My ex-husband, who had made it to the position of manager, quickly lost all credibility at the company. He was demoted and sent to work in a remote location. He asked his affair partner to come with him, but she promptly dumped him, saying she had no interest in a man without money. In the end, to his affair partner, my ex-husband was just a rich plaything. My ex-husband was abandoned by his parents and relatives, left to work alone in a distant place, living a lonely life in his house. It's all what he deserves, and honestly, I'd like to beat him up to my heart's content if I could. Meanwhile, I sold the house I got from my ex-husband and moved back to my parents' house. With the alimony from my ex-husband and his affair partner, I had a considerable amount of money. I didn't feel like working for a while after my daughter passed away, but gradually, I started to think more positively and began working part-time at a cafe near my parents' house. Mom's homemade cake. Rosa loved it so much. I remember my daughter saying that. Now, I bake sweets every day while working at the cafe and honing my pastry skills. I hope to one day serve my own creations on the menu, and just like how my daughter was happy eating my cake, I want to see someone else smiling while eating my cake. For my daughter's sake, I have to live my life to the fullest. With that thought, I put my all into working towards my dream. Today, thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you resonated with the content, please leave a positive rating and a comment.
I really want some chocolate cake, but I'm stuck in bed feeling awful. Suddenly, my mother-in-law Grace starts yelling at me to get her a cake right now. I couldn't take it anymore and snapped at her. I told her to get her own cake because I only have a month left to live. My name is Olivia, and I'm 28 years old. I met my husband David through a friend, and we got married after dating for 3 years. We don't have kids yet, but we're enjoying our time together. David's family owns a small factory with about 30 workers. They're doing pretty well in their area. The company was started by David's late dad and has grown thanks to everyone's hard work. Now David's sister, Sophia, is in charge of the company. She's not married, but she's really good at running the business. David thinks she got her skills from mom because they both have great communication abilities. Sophia is really nice and easy to talk to, even when we first met. Sophia, my sister-in-law, greeted me warmly, calling me cute and expressing her happiness to have me as a sister. As someone who only had brothers, it felt nice to gain a sister. However, despite this pleasant start, there's a problem with my mother-in-law. Our company has coffee breaks at 10 o'clock a.m. and 3 o'clock p.m. Times I dread. Here's why. Whenever I'm asked to get mom's coffee, it instantly ruins my mood. Our family home is next to the factory, and after my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law chose to retire and stay home. She seems to look forward to these coffee breaks, always saying, "I've been waiting for you, Olivia." I wanted to talk to Sophia once, but she gave me a disappointed look. Naturally, she wasn't in a good mood, and before leaving with a forced smile, she said, "Hey, I have something to say to you. So sit here." And then she complains to me until the break is over. She often comments about why we haven't had kids yet, saying it's not something we can control. If I stay quiet, she gets even more irritated. Why such a gloomy face? I wonder why David chose someone like you. Plus, even your parents, who knows how long you'll live. The sooner the better, she said that with a sigh. Hearing her talk like that, especially about my parents, really hurts. And there's a reason for that. When David and I decided to get married and met his family, this happened. What, you don't have parents? My mother-in-law looked shocked when I told her. It's not like I never had parents. My mom passed away from cancer when I was 10, and my dad died of a heart attack when I was 20. My memories of my mom are fuzzy, but my dad raised my brother and me all by himself. I deeply regret that he passed away before I could repay his kindness. When people hear about my situation, they usually look at me with pity and say, "You must have had a hard time." But my mother-in-law reacted differently. "So you might not live long either, huh?" She actually said that while I was stunned by her response. It was so rude and insensitive. My husband David told me that despite my shock, my mother-in-law kept complaining, insisting it was an important issue. Should I rethink this marriage? Just as I was considering that, Sophia, who had been quiet until then, suddenly slammed her hand on the table and said, "What are you talking about?" She said it so quietly that everyone in the room froze. Then my mother-in-law said, "Right, Sophia, you agree with me, don't you?" That's what she said. Sophia's response was icy. "What?" I told Mom, "David chose Olivia himself, and she's wonderful. Why can't you support that?" She said this to my mother-in-law with a cold stare. My mother-in-law, who adored her daughter, seemed shocked by Sophia's words. After that, she stopped making mean comments except when we were alone. Even during the coffee breaks, she looked disappointed when I brought her coffee instead of Sophia. Luckily, David and I rented a room near his family home, so I only had to endure her complaints during those 10-minute coffee breaks. I'm relieved we don't live together. But my peace was suddenly shattered that year. A record-breaking hurricane brought a lot of misfortune my way. "Olivia, something terrible has happened." I'd never heard David sound so panicked. I hurried to the living room and found it in chaos. "What's going on?" Our ceiling was leaking badly because of the hurricane. It wasn't just our room, the owner told us it was happening in other rooms too. It seemed impossible to fix while staying there, so we needed to find somewhere else to live. Sophia suggested cheerfully, "Why worry? Just stay with us. Your commute will be 30 seconds. She said this innocently, so we ended up staying with David's family for a while. Welcome home, David. It must have been tough, but Mom is happy we can live together again. My mother-in-law greeted us warmly, but David mostly ignored her, acting like a rebellious teenager. Then she said, "Oh, Olivia, you're here too. I didn't notice because you're so quiet. Smile more." My husband looked frustrated, and all I could do was force a smile, knowing we'd be staying there for a while. After moving in, I noticed something odd. The first time was during dinner on our first night. Wanting to show my appreciation, I cooked bread, soup, and steak. It wasn't fancy, but my mother-in-law and sister-in-law said it was delicious and finished it all. I felt genuinely relieved. After a while, my mother-in-law suddenly stood up and brought a container from the fridge, humming a tune. She opened it and piled a ton of its contents onto her steak. Mom, you're still eating that stuff." My husband, sitting next to me, looked disgusted. Sophia, my sister-in-law, rolled her eyes and said she won't stop no matter how many times I tell her. "I've given up." Then she burst into laughter. At first, I couldn't tell what was on top of the steak, but upon closer inspection, I realized it was jam. While it's not uncommon to have sweet sauces on meat, adding jam to a seasoned steak seemed bizarre. When you eat something salty, you crave something sweet, right? That's why, she said, looking quite pleased with herself. Honestly, it gave me heartburn just watching her. For the record, I'm not a fan of sweet sauces on meat. Come on, Olivia, why don't you try it? It's delicious, my mother-in-law said, turning to me. For the first time, I didn't want to eat it, but I forced a smile. Apparently, that wasn't the reaction she was hoping for. I'm recommending it for a reason. You might live longer if you follow my example. With that parting shot, she retreated to her room, leaving me speechless. My husband and sister-in-law apologized, saying, sorry, Mom's at it again with her nonsense. Apparently, my mother-in-law has a serious sweet tooth and doesn't feel her day is complete without eating cake. Surprisingly, her annual health checkups always come back normal. Come to think of it, she's always eating cake during our 3:00 p.m. coffee breaks. I remembered that I like cake too, but having it every day would be boring. Plus, what about blood sugar levels? I've always been careful about my health, especially since my parents had short lifespans. So my mother-in-law's jam steak was quite surprising. Wait till Sophia buy cake every day. Caught off guard, Sophia admitted, yeah, she makes me go buy it. She says it's embarrassing for her to do it herself. Thanks to that, I've become good friends with all the local cake shops, Sophia said, laughing. My husband David chimed in, Sophia, this isn't a laughing matter. Mom's getting older. She needs to start caring about her health. I've always left it to Sophia to deal with Mom, and I feel bad about it. With that, he looked frustrated. Well, I think you guys will have to help out more from now on, Sophia said cheerfully, and I prepared myself for more interactions with my mother-in-law. Living with my in-laws made my commute much shorter, so I took the lead in doing household chores before and after work. I tried to talk to my mother-in-law, but she often ignored me or gave me the cold shoulder. Despite that, she never missed a chance to complain about the kids during our coffee breaks. Since moving here, I've been having more rough days. It's probably the stress. My mood was low and my husband noticed. He offered several times to go to the doctor with me. Let's move out and stay at a hotel for a while, he suggested, but I turned it down because it felt like a waste of money, and the nearest hotel was still a bit far. Then the worst news came, a week-long business trip. I was stunned when my husband told me. The reason for my dread? Sophia, my sister-in-law, would also be going, meaning I'd be alone with my mother-in-law. Yeah, I said it. My husband offered to take me with him, but I thought, it's just a week. I hope I can manage, especially since I still wasn't feeling well. On the day they left, Sophia sent me a mother-in-law survival guide to my phone. If anything happens, just give her cake and you'll be fine. I couldn't help but laugh. The guide included local cake shops and my mother-in-law's favorite cakes from each. For someone like me who was gearing up for a tough week, this information was a lifesaver. In a week, our home renovations would be done, and we could move back. I thought optimistically, I could handle this, but that hope faded on the first night. When I returned from work, my mother-in-law was blocking the entrance. You know why I'm angry, don't you? She snapped. No, I don't. I'm not psychic, I replied, losing patience. You missed both the 10:00 a.m. and 3:00 p.m. coffee breaks today. Her words caught me off guard. Indeed, with my husband and Sophia away and end-of-month tasks piling up, I'd completely forgotten about my mother-in-law's coffee breaks, and I never had a coffee break myself. I thought she'd understand since she used to work, but she yelled at me the moment we were alone. You start this harassment, you wicked woman, she said with an angry look. I felt a huge disconnect. Why was I being yelled at like this? Did I deserve to be called wicked? Suppressing my anger, I thought, it's just a few more days, and said, I did buy cake during my lunch break. It's in the office fridge. Sorry I didn't bring it here. Her face instantly changed from angry to smiling. Let's forget about today. Don't forget tomorrow, okay? She said cheerfully and went back to her room. From then on, I made sure never to forget the coffee breaks, knowing how much trouble it would cause if I upset my mother-in-law. On the day my husband and Sophia were supposed to return, I felt incredibly stressed. I was hit with nausea, headaches, and a loss of appetite. I took the day off and went to the hospital. It's pretty serious. Can your family come right away? I couldn't stop crying at the doctor's words. I was told I have cancer and at most 6 months, maybe even just 1 month, to live. I returned home, my face stained with tears, my body trembling, and collapsed onto the bed. The door burst open. What are you doing, skipping work? Sophie and David are working hard, and you're slacking off? Her yelling worsened my headache. I didn't have the energy to respond, so I just said, I'm not feeling well, and closed my eyes. Mother-in-law didn't seem to care. She didn't want to leave the room and kept complaining to me. She said things like, that's why you can't have kids, and who knows if you'll live long. I just stayed silent, pretending to be asleep. Then suddenly, she asked about today's coffee break. Is she really this insensitive? I thought, opening my eyes to see her standing over me. Grace, I'm sorry. I'm not feeling well enough to go shopping today. Could you please? She cut me off. I don't care. I want chocolate cake now. Go buy it. You're probably faking it. She screamed at me louder than ever. My frustration exploded at the woman in front of me, who was acting selfishly like a child. Shut up. Listen to me. I have 1 month to live. Go buy your own damn cake, you idiot. My words seemed to shock my mother-in-law, who stared at me wide-eyed. Then, from behind her, Mom, what are you doing? And Olivia, what do you mean by 1 more month? My husband, looking pale, and my sister-in-law, equally concerned, were standing there. Oh, weren't you supposed to come back tomorrow? Ignoring the visibly shaken mother-in-law, my husband came to my side. I felt so relieved by his action that I burst into tears. I can't take it anymore. The doctor says it might be cancer, and I'm not feeling well, but you keep nagging me to go buy cake. Enough is enough. Stop bothering me about the kids too. Just leave me alone, you idiot. I let out all my resentment towards my mother-in-law while crying. My husband and sister-in-law looked at her with cold eyes. Sending a sick person to buy cake. Are you stupid? Sophia, who's usually all smiles, had a face I'd never seen before. A terrifying one. You've been making snide remarks about the kids. Look, I didn't say anything because it's a private matter, but the reason we can't have kids is me. My husband raised his voice as he said this. In reality, about a year after we got married, we consulted a doctor because we were having trouble conceiving. The test showed that I was fine, but my husband's numbers were low. He felt really down about it and kept apologizing to me with a sad face. I didn't want to make him feel that way, so I avoided talking about kids as much as possible. I did want children, but I thought life with just my husband was enough. I never considered leaving him because we couldn't have kids. I didn't tell my mother-in-law because I knew she'd start nagging. She listened to my husband's words with a face like her soul had been sucked out. Just then, my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the hospital. Hello, yes, right now. My husband just got home. Okay, understood. The doctor who had called earlier sounded urgent, asking us to come right away. Am I really that sick? I started to cry from the anxiety. It's okay, Olivia. Can you stand? I'm with you. My husband, who also looked like he was about to cry, and I rushed to the hospital. As we were leaving, I caught a glimpse of my mother-in-law getting a stern lecture from Sophia. When we arrived at the hospital, we were immediately ushered into a room where the doctor and even the hospital director were waiting to offer us a deep apology. It was a misdiagnosis. According to the doctor, they had mixed up my medical records with another patient who had the same name and birth date as me. I couldn't believe such a thing could happen, but the doctor did look extremely worn out. This incident was later covered in a local news segment, and the hospital vowed to review its working conditions. We were then referred to another hospital. When we returned to my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law seemed to have been scolded by Sophia and was shrinking in her seat. Sophia later told me she was worried that her newlywed son might lose his wife and be heartbroken. It might be love turned inside out, but it was a real hassle seeing our tear-streaked faces. Even my mother-in-law broke down. Did I really do something that bad? She started crying. So what about Olivia? Sophia asked with a concerned look. I'm pregnant, I said, tears of joy filling my eyes. My husband was also shedding tears of happiness beside me. We immediately went to the maternity hospital as advised. It's still early, but yes, you're pregnant. We can confirm the heartbeat. Hearing that, we both burst into tears, even though we were in a hospital. Sophia also cried, saying, I'm so glad, so very glad. As for what happened next, Sophia got engaged to her long-term boyfriend and moved to another state with him after quitting her job. We had heard about this beforehand, so it wasn't a surprise. My husband, who was taking over as the new CEO, seemed to have his hands full with client visits. The business trip, by the way, was for that reason. He told me later that he was able to come home a day early because it ended sooner than expected. Mother-in-law seemed to know nothing about it. What? Getting married, quitting her job, and moving to another state. She was shocked. Sophia told her, "Yeah, I told you. Remember?" "Well, it doesn't matter. It's settled." Mother-in-law was in a daze, and we all laughed. We returned home to find our leaky roof repaired and our room looking brand new. We cheered in delight. Things remained awkward with mother-in-law. My husband was angrier than I was and said he never wanted to see her again. But mother-in-law started showing up occasionally during our coffee breaks, holding not cake but small snacks like biscuits. She had stopped the daily cakes and jam steaks, apparently trying to be more health conscious now that she knew a grandchild was on the way. Employees who had worked there since my father-in-law was CEO seemed happy to see mother-in-law. So I realized she wasn't inherently a bad person. Our conversations gradually increased and she stopped complaining. When our daughter Emma was born, mother-in-law transformed. She started doing things like buying diapers and leaving side dishes for dinner, saying, "Feel free to eat. You're always working so hard." Even when she knew I was home, she'd send a message and leave without ringing the doorbell. The side dishes were in a cooler, and I appreciated her thoughtfulness. I felt I could get along with this version of mother-in-law. What really convinced me was when Emma was born. Mother-in-law took my hand and said, "Thank you, Olivia. Really, thank you." Seeing her tears, I knew she was sincere. Sophia also seems to be doing well and recently announced her pregnancy. It seems like it won't be long before we all gather at the in-laws' house for a friendly meal.